The Morven stood in the galley doorway, and the cook did not look up. Dr. Vess saw it happen on the wall of monitors and forgot, for a full second, how to make sound. The Morven was the length of a supply sled and built like a thing that had been designed by something angry. 6 limbs, plating the color of wet slate, a head that was mostly jaw, mounted on a neck that could reach across a room without the body appearing to move. It had come through the fauna wing's blast door, the blast door that was rated to hold it, that had held it for 11 cycles. And it had come through the service spine, and it was now filling the mouth of the station galley like a shadow that had decided to have teeth. And the human at the counter was scraping a pan. "Camera 9, Vess said. Her voice arrived thin. She tried again, and this time it carried across the veterinary station's cramped observation deck. "Everyone, camera 9, now." Adjunct Taro turned, saw the feed, and made the whistling intake his people made instead of screaming. 2 junior handlers went still. On the main board, the containment schematic bled from amber into a red that pulsed like a wound. The human kept scraping the pan. She was small. That was the first thing Vess's training flagged, and the first thing her instinct threw out as impossible, because small things did not stand with their spine to an apex predator. She wore a stained apron over station coveralls with the sleeves shoved to the elbow. Her hair was tied back with something that had once been white. She had a rag over one shoulder and a wooden spoon in a pot, and her whole attention was bent, entirely, on the surface of a sauce. "Get her out," said Warden Kovic. He had arrived without Vess noticing, which for Brax of his mass was its own small miracle. He filled the doorway of the observation deck the way the Morven filled the doorway of the galley, and his 4 eyes had gone flat and hard. "Get the cook out. Sound the cell, drop the corridor plates. I want a lane cut to the galley in 90 seconds. You drop the corridor plates," Vess said, "and you seal her in with it." Kovic's jaw worked. He knew she was right. That was the trouble with the warden. He was never wrong about weapons and never right about anything that breathed. On the monitor, the Morven took a step into the galley. 1 step. The floor did not shake because the Morven did not make the floor shake. It moved the way water moves, all of it at once and none of it loud. Its head lowered. The great jaw parted a finger's width. Steam from the human's pot drifted across the lens, and for an instant the whole frame was white. When it cleared, the human had turned around. Vess's hand closed on the edge of the console. The human looked at the Morven. She looked at it the way a person looks at a coworker who has walked into the room at a bad time. Then she pointed the wooden spoon at the floor, at a spot near the prep island, and she said something. The galley pickup was old and half-fouled with grease, and the word came through the speakers flattened and small, but everyone on the observation deck heard it. "Down." The Morven lay down. For a moment nobody on the deck breathed. Taro's whistling stopped. Kovic's 4 eyes did not blink. On the schematic the red kept pulsing, indifferent, because the schematic did not know that the most dangerous confirmed predator in the Concord's custody had just folded its legs under itself on a galley floor and put its jaw down on the deck plating like a hound settling in front of a fire. "Doctor," Taro whispered, "doctor it." "I see it," Vess said. "It lay down." "I see it, Taro." The human turned back to her pot. Vess had spent 31 years learning the moods of dangerous animals across a dozen worlds, and she had a rule she taught every adjunct in their first week. The calm animal is the one you fear. The snarling animal is frightened. It is telling you where its edges are. The animal that does not bother to snarl has already decided it does not need to. She had said this so many times it had worn smooth in her mouth. She had never, in 31 years, watched it happen to a predator from the other side of the glass. Because the Morven was calm, and the human was calmer. "Pull her file," Vess said. "We don't have a she's contract," said one of the handlers, a young Celti named Osk with his crest gone pale. "Galley staff, kitchen. She's not, she wouldn't be in the fauna roster, she's just..." Then pull whatever we have. Name, homeworld, anything. Vess did not take her eyes off camera 9. And somebody open a channel to that galley before the warden opens a hole in the wall. Kovic's mouth flattened. He did not deny it. The name came up on the sideboard a moment later, sparse the way contract files always were. VAROVIC Del. Provisioning Specialist Grade 2, Species, Human. Origin. The file gave a designation, a long Concord catalog string, and then in the human's own hand in the notes field, added when she'd signed on, 3 words. Vess read them twice. Harrow's Field, Earth. Vess did not know what Harrow's Field was. She knew what Earth was, in the way most people in the Concord knew what Earth was, which was to say she knew it as a rumor with a reputation, and a diplomatic exemption stapled to its border. A death world, one of the loud ones. The kind of place the Survey Corps rated in colors that did not appear on maps of habitable space. She had processed exactly 1 human in 31 years, a wound she'd stitched on a freighter, and the human had thanked her and asked whether the needle could go faster. She looked at the small woman scraping a pan with an apex predator at her feet, and something in the back of Vess's skull, some old animal part that predated her training and her doctorate and her careful clinical calm, quietly sat up and paid attention. Channels open, Osk said. Galley intercom. She'll hear you on the counter panel. Vess leaned into the pickup. She kept her voice level, the voice she used for a spooked grazer or a wounded pack hunter, the voice that said nothing is wrong and I am not food. Specialist Varovic. This is veterinary adjunct Vess, fauna wing. Do not make any sudden movements. There is an animal in the galley with you. On the monitor, the human's shoulders moved. It took Vess a moment to understand what she was seeing. The human had laughed, not loudly. A short exhale through the nose, the kind a person gives when someone tells them something they already know. The human reached up without turning and pressed the counter panel with 2 fingers. Yeah, she said. I noticed. They had built Velum Reach 3 generations ago as a quarantine depot and expanded it, unwisely, into a fauna research station, on the theory that a deep station 11 jumps from anywhere was a safe place to study things that killed you. The fauna wing held 40-odd specimens on any given rotation, grazers and pack runners for the xenobiology grants, a pair of tunnel swimmers in a flooded bay. And at the far end behind the doubled blast doors, in a cell that had cost more than the rest of the wing combined, the Morving. It had come off a survey world called Thren, where it sat at the top of a food web that ran red all the way down. The survey team that captured it had lost 4. The transfer crew had lost 2. Since arrival it had killed 3 handlers over 11 cycles, each one a careful person who had made exactly 1 small mistake, and the fauna wing had stopped pretending it was a research subject and started treating it as what it was, which was a weapon in a box that occasionally opened its eyes. The standing order in the event of a full breach was clemency negative. That was the phrase in the manual. It meant, do not risk personnel to preserve the specimen. It meant, if the Morving got out, you killed it. Kovic had already keyed the order into his slate. Vess watched him do it. She watched the confirmation glow at his wrist, 1 thumb press away from a lattice of automated turrets in the service spine that would turn the galley corridor into a killing box. Hold that, she said. It's out, Doctor. It lay down. It lay down in a room with a person in it. Kovic's voice was not cruel. That was the worst part. He had lost handlers to that thing. He had written the letters. I have watched that animal open a titanium hatch by learning which corner was weakest and leaning on it for 6 days. It is not calm. It is deciding. Then let it decide with the plates up, Vess said, because the moment you drop them she is a smaller obstacle between it and the corridor, and I would like to not have to explain to the assembly why we shot a human being to get a clean line on a specimen we could have recovered. She held his gaze, all 4 of his eyes, which most people could not do. Give me the room, Warden. Give me until it stops being calm. If it stops being calm, the galley is yours." For a long moment Kovic said nothing. Then he took his thumb off the confirmation and folded his arms, which on a Brax was a gesture that involved a great deal of arm. "Your room," he said, "until it moves wrong, then it's mine and you'll owe me the paperwork." The galley was warm and it smelled of onions and rendered fat and the faint mineral bite of the station's recycled air, and Del Varovic was not going to lose the pan sauce. She'd have said this out loud if there'd been anyone to say it to, but the only other living thing in the room with an opinion was the tabby, and the tabby had already voted by way of not moving off the warm spot on top of the proofing box. So Del kept her voice for the sauce in the panel, and, apparently now, the wall. The thing in the doorway was the biggest animal she had ever been in a room with, and she had grown up in a room with a lot of animals. It had lain down when she told it to, which surprised her a little but not as much as it seemed to have surprised the alien on the intercom, whose voice had gone up half an octave and then very carefully back down. Del knew that trick. She'd used it herself on skittish yearlings and skittish men. The "don't panic" voice. It was a good voice. She'd have found it more reassuring if the person using it weren't so clearly the one panicking. She turned the heat down under the sauce. It had come to the edge of breaking twice while the thing was walking in, and a broken beurre blanc was a broken beurre blanc whether or not there was an apex predator in your kitchen. And Del had made this dish for the station's skeleton crew of 9, because it was the last of the good butter before the resupply, and she was not going to waste the last of the good butter. "Specialist Varovic," the wall said, "I need you to listen to me carefully." "I'm listening," Del whisked, low and slow off the heat. Coax it back. "You're the vet." "I'm the vet." A pause. "The animal behind you is designated a Class 12 apex predator. It is responsible for 3 fatalities in this facility. I want you to understand exactly what is in the room with you. 6 legs, about a ton, looks like it's made of roof slate, real quiet on its feet." Del glanced over her shoulder. The Morven's eyes were open. They were on her. They had been on her since it walked in, and they had not moved to the knife block or the door or the tabby, which any predator worth its teeth would have clocked. They stayed on her. "It's watching me cook." "Yes," the vet said, in the tone of someone who had not expected the human to notice and was recalibrating. "It is watching you. Specialist, that is not a comforting behavior. A Morven that is watching you is a Morven that is assessing you." Del tasted the sauce off the back of the spoon. It needed acid. She reached without hurrying for the lemon. "It's not, though." "I'm sorry." "Assessing me." She have the lemon on the board, one clean stroke, and behind her she heard the smallest sound, a shift of weight, the Morven's head lifting a fraction at the movement of the knife and then settling again when the knife did nothing interesting. "I've been assessed by things that wanted to eat me. It's a specific look. You'd know it." She squeezed the lemon into the pan. "That's not the look. That thing's not deciding whether to eat me. It decided something else a while ago, and now it's just seeing what I do next." On the observation deck, Vess went very still. "Specialist," she said carefully, "what do you think it decided?" Del wiped her hands on the rag over her shoulder. She looked at the Morven, and the Morven looked at her, jaw down on the deck, one enormous foreleg tucked under its chest, for all the world like a farm dog that had come inside out of the weather and was waiting to be told whether it was allowed to stay. "Same thing they always decide," she said, "that I'm not the one who runs." Vess muted the channel. "Taro," she said, "threat display. What has it done since it entered?" Taro's fingers were already flying across the log. "Entered at a walk. Non-vocal. No hackle response. It doesn't have hackles, but the plate flare is flat. It's completely flat, doctor. I've never seen it flat when a handler's in the room. It lay down on verbal command from the human. It is not oriented on any secondary target, not the exits, not the animal on the box, nothing. It is tracking the human, and only the human, and its posture is." He stopped. He looked at Vess with his crest gone entirely white. Its posture is submissive. Say the word you want to say, Taro. The adjunct swallowed. It's imprinted, or it's reading her as dominant as Pac Senior. Doctor, it lay down. I know it lay down. Handlers spent 11 cycles trying to get it to accept a handler as senior. Reward conditioning, scent pairing, the whole protocol. It killed 3 of them. And a kitchen worker points a spoon at the floor in it. I know, Taro. Vess put a hand flat on the console to stop it from shaking, which was a thing she'd have denied it was doing. I know. She had a decision in front of her, and she could feel the shape of it, and she did not like the shape. The clean answer, the answer the manual wanted, was to kill the specimen. Clemency negative. It was out. It was near a person. The risk math was not close. Kovic was standing 4 paces behind her with the authority to do it and the will and the wounds that justified it, and every cycle she made him wait was a cycle she'd have to defend at the inquiry. And the specimen was lying on a galley floor with its jaw down, being calm, next to a human who was making a sauce. Vess had spent her life on a bet. The bet was that no animal was only a weapon, that under the teeth there was a nervous system with reasons, and if you could find the reasons, you could work with the animal instead of dying to it. It was not a popular bet in a facility that had buried 3 handlers. She had won it more often than the warden liked and lost it exactly twice, and both times she had gone to the incinerator herself and stood there while it burned, because that was the price of the bet and she paid it. She looked at camera 9. She looked at the small human who had grown up somewhere called Harrow's Field on a World, the Survey Corps rated in colors that did not appear on maps, and who had turned her back on a Class 12 Apex to save the last of the good butter. And Vess made the decision she was going to have to defend for the rest of her career. She unmuted the channel. Specialist Varovic, she said, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you'd notice if I wasn't. That'd be a nice change. Dell was plating. She'd found a warm dish somewhere, and she was spooning something white and glossy over what looked like a piece of pale fish, and the Morven was watching every motion of her hands with the total, unblinking attention of a creature that had never in its life been fed by hand. Go ahead. My standing orders in a full breach are to destroy the specimen. It is out of containment and it is near you. By the manual, I should already have done it. Dell set the plate down, but you haven't. No. Why not? Vess watched the Morven's jaw, which had not moved, and the plate flare along its flanks, which was flat, flat, flat. Because it lay down when you told it to, she said. And I have spent 31 years wanting to meet the animal that would do that, and I would like, if it's at all possible, to not have to shoot it 40 seconds after I finally have. There was a silence on the line. On the monitor, the human picked up the plate and, without any particular ceremony, crouched down and held it out at arm's length toward the Morven's jaw. Every alien on the observation deck came halfway out of their seats. Specialist Vess began. You want to keep it alive, Dell said. Not to the vet exactly, more to the animal. You're going to want it to associate this room with something other than the box you had it in. She set the plate down on the deck plating, a body length from the Morven's jaw, and stood, and stepped back to her counter, and picked up her own cooling bowl of the same dish, and began calmly to eat. The Morven looked at the plate. It looked at the human eating. It looked at the plate again. Then it extended its neck. The whole room seemed to lean with it, and it ate the fish off the deck in a single motion that made no sound at all, and it put its jaw back down, and it went on watching the human eat her dinner. Huh, Dell said around a mouthful. Would you look at that? On the observation deck, nobody said anything for a while. Warden Kovic broke the silence, because someone was always going to be Kovic. It's eating from her hand, he said. You understand that's worse. How is that worse? Said Osk before he could stop himself. Kovic turned all 4 eyes on the young Celti, who wilted. Because a predator that eats what you give it, the warden said, is a predator that has decided you belong to it. She hasn't tamed it. She's been claimed. That thing will let her feed it right up until she does one thing it doesn't like, and then it will remember what it is, and there will be a very short conversation, and we will be cleaning the galley. He looked at Vess. You've seen it, Doctor, on your grazers, on your pack runners. The tame one turns. He was not wrong about the general case. That was the thing about the warden. He was never wrong about the general case, and this was not the general case. And Vess did not yet have the words for how she knew that. Only the 31 years and the flat plate flare, and the way the Morven had eaten off the deck without once, not once, glancing at the human's exposed throat. Prep a recovery plan anyway, she told Taro. Full sedation protocol. Dart waits for a Class 12 delivery options, reversal agent standing by. If we're going to get it back in a box, I want to do it with chemistry, not with the warden's turrets. Ask, I want the fauna wing sedation stores inventoried and staged at the corridor junction. Move. They moved. It gave the deck something to do with its terror, which was half of crisis management on a good day. Vess keyed the galley channel. Specialist, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing while you answer, because whatever you're doing is working better than anything my facility managed in 11 cycles. Dell was rinsing the bowl. Ask. Have you interacted with this animal before? Never seen it, didn't know it was here. I do provisioning and the shift meals. I'm not cleared past the mess in the stores. She set the bowl in the rack. Somebody's power fault, was it? Felt the lights hiccup about 20 minutes ago. Figured it was the usual. There was a fault, Vess said. It compromised the fauna wing's primary and the backup didn't take the load in time. The specimen exploited the gap. It took the shortest path through the service spine and the shortest path ended at your galley. Shortest path to what? Vess paused. It was a good question and she had not, in the churn of the last quarter hour, actually asked it. Predators did not wander. The Morven had come out of its cell into a station full of running, shouting, frightened bodies. A station that, to a hunter, must have lit up like a field full of prey. And it had ignored all of it and walked, in a straight and unhurried line, to the one room with the one person who wasn't running. I don't know, Vess said honestly. Predators move toward opportunity or away from threat. You were neither, you were cooking. Smells travel in the spine, Dell said. Whole station knows when I do onions. She wiped down the counter. But that's not it either, is it? It didn't come for the food. It came and then I gave it food. No, Vess said slowly. It didn't come for the food. It came because everything else on this station was screaming and running, Dell said. And in a place like that, an animal like that goes looking for the thing that isn't afraid, because that's the thing that knows something it doesn't. She turned around and looked at the Morven, and the Morven looked back, and she said it plainly, without drama, the way she'd say the stock was low. It's not hunting me. It's hiding behind me. The observation deck went quiet again. Vess realized her hand had come up to her own mouth, a stealthy gesture of astonishment she had not made since she was a juvenile. Taro, she said quietly, the behavioral logs, when the fault hit before it breached, what was the specimen doing? Taro scrolled. His crest, which had been white, went a shade paler. Distress posture, he read. The cell sensors logged it as agitation, elevated, we flagged it as pre-breach aggression. Doctor, the fault dropped the cell's environmental systems. Temperature, pressure, the low-frequency field we used to keep it settled, all of it, for 4 minutes before the breach. He looked up. It wasn't breaking out to hunt. Its whole world went dark and cold and wrong, and it broke out to get away from it. And it went looking for the one thing on the station that wasn't panicking, Vess finished. Nobody said anything. On the monitor, the human filled a shallow dish with water from the tap and set it on the deck. And the Morven drank, its enormous head lowered, the great jaw working, and the sound came through the fouled pickup soft and ordinary as any animal at any trough on any world. Well, said Kovic into the silence, that's very moving. It's still a class 12, it's still out, and I still have 9 skeleton crew locked in cells wondering if the doors will hold. You have a frightened animal, Doctor. I've buried 3 handlers to frightened animals. Frightened is not safe. Frightened is worse. And that, Vess thought, was the true and terrible thing, and it was why she could not simply let the moment be beautiful. Fear did not make a predator harmless. Fear made a predator unpredictable, and unpredictable near a soft-bodied human was a countdown. The Morven had chosen Del Varovic as its anchor in a world gone wrong, and anchors, when the storm got bad enough, were the things a drowning creature climbed on top of. I hear you, Warden, she said, which is exactly why I'm not going to leave her in there indefinitely trusting a scared apex to stay grateful. She keyed the channel. Specialist, here's where we are. That animal isn't hunting you, but it is frightened, and frightened is its own danger. I want to get it sedated and back into containment while it's calm and while you're intact. I need your help to do that because right now you're the only thing on this station it trusts. Are you willing? Del considered the Morven. The Morven had finished the water and put its jaw back down, and its eyes had gone to half-mast. The way an animal's eyes go when it has decided, provisionally, against its every instinct, that it is safe. Yeah, Del said, but you're going to do it right or you're not doing it in my galley. Define right. You dart it, it goes down slow and scared and alone, feeling exactly what it felt in that box when the lights went out. Del crossed her arms. That's what broke it out. You do that again, and next time the fault hits or the next station or whatever, you've taught it that the one time it trusted somebody, the somebody held it still for the needle. I've broke horses. You break something like that once, it stays broke. She looked up at the camera, found the lens, held it. It goes down calm with me here, or it doesn't go down. Those are the terms. There is a kind of person who issues terms to an armed facility from inside a room with an apex predator. And Vess had met perhaps 4 of them in her life, and every one of them had been right. Agreed, she said. Kovic made a sound in his chest like gravel settling. You're negotiating recovery protocol with the food. I'm negotiating, Vess said, with the only member of this facility the specimen has voluntarily obeyed. If that's the food, Warden, then I've been doing this job wrong for 31 years, and so have you. She turned to Taro before Kovic could answer. Sedation plan. Talk to me. Taro pulled it up on the main board. For a class 12 at this body mass, the load is significant. We stage it in 2 agents, a settling compound first, low dose, to drop arousal without dropping consciousness, and then the primary once it's relaxed enough to take a full sedative without a fear spike. The settling agent is the tricky one. It has to be delivered close, and it has to be delivered without the animal reading it as an attack, or the arousal spike burns through the dose and we've just annoyed a Morven. He hesitated. Standard delivery is a pole syringe or a dart, at range, both of which read as an attack, Vess said. Both of which read as an attack, Taro agreed. And a dart at that range into that plating, we'd have to hit the soft tissue behind the foreleg or under the jaw, which means a handler within 4 meters, which means a handler dies, said Kovic, or the human does it. The words landed on the deck and sat there. Vess looked at the monitor. She looked at the small human leaning against her counter with a rag over her shoulder, and a ton of frightened apex predator settling into a doze at her feet. And she understood, with the particular sick clarity of a person watching 2 bad options and no others, that the Warden was right about the only thing he'd been right about all day. The Morven would let exactly 1 living creature within 4 meters of it while it was afraid. And that creature was not a handler, and it was not the Warden, and it was certainly not Vess. It was the cook. No, said Osk. He said it before Rank could stop him and then flushed at his own voice. We can't ask her, she's a provisioning specialist, doctor. She's not trained, she's not cleared. We can't hand a civilian a syringe and put her hand under the jaw of a that's a fatality waiting. If her hand shakes, if it spikes, if it moves wrong, she's meat. We'd be killing her to save the specimen. That's backwards. That's insane. And it was. That was the thing Vess kept coming back to, turning it over, unable to make it come out any other way. In every scenario she had ever trained for, the human in the room was the thing you protected, and the animal was the thing you managed. The whole shape of her profession was built on that asymmetry, the soft one and the dangerous one, and your job was to keep the soft one from being killed by the dangerous one. And here the soft one was the calmest thing on the station, and the dangerous one was hiding behind her from the dark, and the only way anyone was getting out of this galley hole was if the vet stopped trying to save the human from the beast and started, instead, working out how to help the human save the beast. "Ask," Vess said. "Look at camera 9. Look at it and tell me which one of them is in danger." The young Celti looked. On the monitor, Del Varovic had picked her wooden spoon back up and was, apparently, resuming her prep for the shift meal that was now going to be several hours late, and the Morven had rolled its great slate bulk half onto its side to keep her in view, and the tabby had descended from the proofing box and was walking, tail up, along the counter's edge, entirely uninterested in the largest predator in conquered custody, which flicked one ear at the small striped earth animal, and then, deliberately, looked away from it, the way a big dog defers to the house cat, because the house cat has simply always outranked it and everyone involved knows it. Osk's crest went flat. "The specimen," he said quietly, "the specimen's in danger from us." "From us," Vess said. "Now help me make sure it doesn't have to be." Del had a system, and the system did not care that there was an apex predator in it. This was not bravery exactly, though the vet on the wall clearly thought it was, and Del wasn't going to talk her out of a good opinion. It was that Del had grown up on Harrow's Field, which was the kind of place where the local fauna had opinions about you and the weather had worse ones, and where the first thing her grandmother had taught her, before reading, before numbers, before how to bank a fire, was that panic was a decision, and she was not required to make it. You did not run from the field cats. Running was a sound the field cats were built to answer. You did not scream at the drays when they spooked in the traces with a storm coming. You put your hand flat on the big muscle of the neck, and you made your voice the most boring thing in the world, and you gave the animal something to believe other than its own fear. You did not, whatever else you did, let a frightened thing see that you were frightened too, because a frightened thing looks to you to know how afraid to be, and if you show it the bottom of the well it will jump. The Morven was, functionally, a very large field cat that had never met anyone who wasn't afraid of it. Del had clocked that within about 90 seconds of it lying down. Everything it did was the behavior of an animal braced for the world to hurt it and astonished, moment to moment, when the world didn't. It flinched at the knife not because the knife was interesting, but because in its whole life, every fast movement near it had been a goad or a shock prod or a thing that meant pain. It watched her hands because her hands were the first hands it had ever seen that reached toward it slow. She wasn't taming it. You couldn't tame a grown apex in an afternoon. That was children's story nonsense, and Del had no illusions. What she was doing was much smaller and much older. She was being the calm one. She was letting a scared animal borrow her nervous system until its own could remember how to work. Her grandmother had a word for it that didn't translate, and the nearest Del could get in Concord Standard was steadying, the way you steadied a ladder for someone else to climb. "They want to put you back in the box," she told the Morven, low, whisking. It couldn't understand the words, and she knew that, and she said them anyway because the words weren't for it, the tone was. "I'm not going to lie to you, big man, box, needle, all of it, but we're going to do it so it doesn't feel like the last time. That's the deal I got you. That's the best deal going." She tasted the sauce, still needed a minute. "You're going to hate the needle. Everybody hates the needle. I'm going to be right here for it." The Morven's ear flicked toward her voice and then relaxed. Its eyes drifted almost shut. On the wall, the vet's voice came again, careful, quiet. "Specialist, we have a plan taking shape. It's going to ask a great deal of you. I want to walk you through it. And then I want you to tell me honestly whether you can do it, because if you can't, we find another way, even if the other way is slower." Del set down the spoon. "Tell me the whole thing," she said. "Don't shave it to make it sound easy. I make better decisions with the whole thing." There was a pause on the line, and when the vet spoke again, there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, something that Del, who had a good ear for it, recognized as respect. "All right," Vess said, "here's the whole thing." The whole thing was this. The settling agent had to go into the soft tissue behind the left foreleg, where the plating gave way to a hand's width of hide. It was a hand injector, thumb-primed, the size of a large stylus. Press it flat to the hide, thumb the plunger, hold for a 3-count, withdraw. The dose would take 4 to 6 minutes to bring the animal's arousal down. During those minutes the Morven would be conscious, would feel the sting, would feel the strange heaviness coming, and would have every opportunity to decide it had been betrayed. That was the window. That was where handlers died. Then, once the settling agent had it drowsy and slack, a remote delivery dart from the corridor, fired by Kovic's people through the galley's serving hatch, would put the primary sedative into the same soft tissue, and the Morven would go down all the way, and a recovery team in containment suits would move in, sling it, and cart it back to a cell that Osk was already rewarming to the temperature the specimen preferred, so that when it woke, its world would be the right temperature, and not the cold, dark thing that had broken it. "You'd be the one holding the injector," Vess said. "There is no version of this where my people do that part. It won't let us close. It's you or it's the warden's turrets, and I would very much like it to be you." Del listened to all of it with her arms crossed and her head tipped, the way she listened to a supplier explaining why the shipment was short. When Vess finished, she was quiet for a moment. 6 minutes, she said, "where it's stung and getting heavy and doesn't know why." "Yes. That's the part that could go wrong. That's the part that could go wrong." Del nodded slowly. "Okay, then we change one thing." She walked unhurried, always unhurried, to the Morven, and she crouched by its left shoulder, well within the reach of that jaw, and she laid her bare hand flat on the slate plating over the shoulder, and the Morven did not so much as tense. "It's not going to get stung and not know why. Not on my watch. I'm going to have my hand on it the whole 6 minutes, so the first thing it feels going wrong is also the thing that's been safe since I walked over here. You give a scared thing one constant, it'll hang onto the constant." She looked up at the camera. "Where's the sting go? Show me the spot." Taro, hands shaking, brought up an anatomical overlay and talked her to it, and Del found the seam of hide behind the foreleg with 2 fingers, pressing gently, mapping it, while the largest predator in conquered custody let a human palpate the one undefended place on its body and only sighed. A long rumble that came up through the plating into Del's hand like a cart rolling over a bridge. "There," Del said, "felt it, soft as a dog's armpit." She sat back on her heels. "Get me the injector." "Specialist," Vess chose her words. "I want to be certain you understand. If it spikes, if the fear wins, you would have no time. You are within its reach. My honest assessment is that if this goes wrong, we could not save you." "I know." Del's voice didn't change. "I've known that since it walked in. I knew it about the field cats too. You don't get to be unscared, doctor. You just get to decide it's not driving." She stood and dusted her knees and went back to her sauce, which had, against all odds, held. "Bring me the injector when it's ready. And tell your warden that if he twitches those turrets while my hand's on this animal, I will personally come find him after and we'll discuss it." Kovic on the deck made his gravel sound. It might have been contempt. It might, Vess thought, have been the closest a Brax came to a laugh. They did not, in the end, get to run the plan clean, because the station was not finished failing. The second fault hit 40 minutes in, while Osk was staging the sedation stores at the corridor junction, and Taro was running dose calculations for the 4th time to be sure. It came the way the first one had, a hiccup in the lights, a stutter in the deck's low hum, And then the observation deck's main board threw an alert Vess had learned to dread, because it was the Fauna Wing's environmental system dropping a second time, which meant the cascade the engineers had sworn was contained was not contained. "Loading," Taro said, reading fast. "It's the same failure, it's the primary bus. They patched around it, but the patch is Doctor. The Fauna Wing's holding cells are on that bus. All of them. The grazers, the pack runners, the tunnel swimmers. If it drops all the way." "How long?" "Minutes, maybe. The engineers are on it, but the last one took 4 to cascade, and this one's already faster." And now the shape of the crisis changed again, and got worse, because the Morven on camera 9 lifted its head. Vess saw it happen. The animal had been drowsing, half on its side, borrowing the human's calm. And then the deck hummed wrong beneath it, the same wrong hum, the same stutter, the exact sensory signature of the thing that had broken its world 4 minutes before it broke its cell. And its head came up off the plating, and its eyes went wide, and the plate flare along its flanks, which had been flat for the better part of an hour, rippled and stood. "It's spiking," Taro said. "The fault's triggering it, it's associating Doctor, it thinks it's happening again." "Warden," Vess did not turn around. "Hands off the confirmation." "Doctor." "Hands off. If you fire now, you have a spiking class 12 and a human in contact. In a galley you can't get a clean line into." "Give me the room." On the monitor, the Morven was coming up off its side, its legs gathering under it, its head swinging toward the galley door and the source of the wrong hum, and Del Varovic had turned from her counter and was watching it come up, and Vess opened her mouth to tell the human to get back, get behind the island, get to the door, get anywhere but there. And Del did the opposite. She stepped in. She crossed the 2 meters to the rising, spiking apex predator. And she did not do it fast. She did it at the same bored, unhurried, this-is-nothing pace she did everything. And she put both hands flat on the great slate shoulder as the animal came up, and she leaned her small weight into it, and she said one word, and the fouled galley pickup carried it flat and small across the observation deck to 9 held breaths. "Easy." The Morven stopped. It stood half-risen, plate flare up, its whole body a bowstring, and the small human leaned on its shoulder with both hands and said easy in a voice that had steadied drays in a lightning storm on a world, the conquered rated in colors that weren't on the maps, and the animal held there, trembling at the top of the fear, with the wrong hum coming up through the floor, and it did not go over the edge. "It's not," Taro breathed, "it's not spiking through. Doctor, the flare it's holding, she's holding it. I see it." Del's hands moved on the shoulder, slow, a long stroke down the plating and back, down and back, and her mouth was moving. The pickup caught fragments. "Easy, big man, I've got you. It's just the lights, easy," and the low-frequency stutter went on coming up through the deck, and the Morven stood in the middle of the sensory nightmare that had broken it once and did not break, because this time the one constant thing had its hands on its shoulder and was not afraid. "Get me the engineers," Vess said quietly. "Tell them whatever it takes, that bus does not drop, not while her hands are on that animal." "And if it drops anyway?" Kovac asked. He wasn't goading now, he was asking. Vess watched the small human hold a ton of terror still with her palms and her voice. "Then we find out," she said, "what she's really made of, and I think we'd all rather not." The engineers held the bus. It cost them a shunt they'd have to explain later, and a burned coupling, and 11 minutes Vess aged a year inside of. But the wrong hum faded out of the deck, and the low-frequency field in the Fauna Wing came back up, and the Morven slowly, by degrees, over the space of those 11 minutes, came back down off the top of the fear with the human's hands never once leaving its shoulder. By the time it was over, the Morven had lowered itself back to the deck, and Del Varovic was sitting on the floor beside it with her back against the prep island, and one hand resting, absently, on the animal's foreleg, the way a person rests a hand on a dog that has finally stopped shaking. The tabby had reappeared and installed itself in Dell's lap. The three of them sat there in the warm galley, the human and the earth cat and the apex predator, and on the observation deck nobody could find anything to say for a long time. It was Osk who finally spoke, and his voice was strange. "I've been logging it," he said. "The whole time, it's protocol you log behavioral events." He looked up from his slate, crest gone soft. "I didn't know what to call the entry. There's no behavioral code for what she just did. For a specimen holding at peak arousal without discharge because a human had contact." He almost laughed. "I had to make one up. I called it, I don't know, steadying. I logged it as steadying contact." Vess looked at the log entry on the sideboard. Steadying contact, unofficial. Specimen held at threshold, no discharge. Resolved to baseline over 11 min human contact maintained throughout. "Leave it," she said. "Leave the entry exactly as you wrote it. When the assembly asks how we recovered a class 12 without a fatality, I want the answer in the log to be a word a kitchen worker taught us." She keyed the galley channel. "Specialist." I don't have the word for what that was." Dell, on the floor, tipped her head back against the island and closed her eyes for a second. And it was the first time in the whole ordeal that she'd let anyone see she was tired. "It's called steadying," she said. "My grandmother's word doesn't really come across in your language." She scratched the tabby behind the ears. The Morven watched her hand do it and unmistakably leaned a fraction closer as if some of the scratching might spill over. "Anyway, now it trusts me more, not less. Which is good for your plan and bad for the part where it eventually has to go in a box." She opened her eyes and looked at the lens. "So let's do it soon, Doctor. While it's tired and it hurts less. Before it gets so it can't stand to be away from me. That's not a thing either of us should build." Vess thought that was the wisest thing she'd heard all day, and she'd heard several. "Agreed," she said. "Taro, where's my injector?" The injector was the problem. "The stage settler's gone," Taro said, and his crest did the thing it did when he was about to have to say something to Vess that Vess would not enjoy. The store at the corridor junction, Osk, had it staged, but the fault took the environmental in that whole spine section when it dropped the fauna bus. The vials cooked. The settling agent denatures above blood heat and it sat at 40 for the better part of the second fault. It's inert. It's water. The reserve. The reserve's in the surgical suite, other side of the wing, and it's cold locked. It'll take 20 minutes to bring a dose up to delivery temperature safely, and if I rush the warming I crack the emulsion and it's useless. 20 minutes, Doctor, minimum, and that's if the warming plate held through the fault, which I won't know until I get there. He was already pulling his gloves on. "I'll go myself." "Take Osk, go." Vess turned back to the board and did the math she'd been avoiding. 20 minutes to warm the settler, then the delivery, then 4 to 6 minutes of the human's hand on the animal while the agent worked, then the dart, then the recovery. She had built a plan on the fragile foundation of a frightened predator's provisional calm, and now she had to ask that calm to hold for the better part of an hour, across a station that had already failed twice and might fail again, with a human's life balanced on the top of it. And the channel light was blinking, the command channel, the one Vess outranked almost no one on. She keyed it, and Overseer Kale's voice came through, dry and precise as a scalpel drawn across slate. "Dr. Vess, I have been watching your feed from the command deck for the last hour, and I would like you to explain to me, in terms I can enter into the incident record, why the clemency negative order attached to specimen designate M9 has not been executed." The observation deck went quiet. Kovac's 4 eyes shifted to Vess. Vess had met Kale twice. The overseer was V. Harn, thin and precise, and utterly without the part of a person that could be argued into anything. He ran the station's compliance the way a scale weighs a thing, without malice and without mercy, and he had arrived on the last resupply with a mandate from the assembly to reduce the fauna wing's unquantified liabilities, which everyone understood to mean the Morven. The specimen is out of containment and stable, Vess said. We have a recovery in progress. Non-lethal. We expect it to be back in a cell within the hour with no loss of personnel and no loss of the specimen. The specimen is out of containment and in physical contact with a member of station staff, Cale said. That is not stable. That is a fatality that has not happened yet. The order exists precisely for this circumstance, Doctor. A Class 12 at large, in proximity to personnel. Execute it. Recover the body for study if you value the specimen so highly. I am told the neural tissue is more useful intact than the animal ever was. With respect, Overseer. I have watched your kitchen worker feed it, water it, and lean on it. I am aware that you find this remarkable. I find it terrifying, which is the correct response, and I note that you have staked the life of a conquered citizen on the continued goodwill of an animal that has killed 3 of your people. If that citizen dies while I stand here permitting you to run an experiment, the record will show that I permitted it. I decline to permit it. Execute the order. And there it was. The clean, cold, defensible logic in Vess could not find the crack in it, because there wasn't one, not on the Overseer's terms. On the Overseer's terms, the human was a liability the vet was gambling, and the animal was an asset the vet was overvaluing, and the sane move was to spend the animal to secure the human. It was airtight. It was correct. It was going to get the Morven killed. Overseer, Vess said, I'm going to ask you to do something you'll find unreasonable. I'm going to ask you to talk to the citizen. A pause. I beg your pardon. The citizen whose life you're protecting, she has a voice in this. She's the one in the room. Before you order me to fire, you should hear from the person you'd be firing to save, because I don't believe she wants it, and I think the record should show whether the person we're rescuing consents to the rescue. Vess keyed the galley channel onto the command line before Cale could refuse. Specialist Varovic, the overseer of this station, wants to destroy the animal in your galley to protect you. Do you want that? On the monitor, Del Varovic was standing at her counter again, and she had, at some point, resumed cooking. There was a whole tray of something coming out of the warmer, because there were 9 skeleton crew locked in cells who were going to be hungry when this was over, and Del had apparently decided they were going to eat. She wiped her hands and pressed the counter panel. No, she said, I don't. The animal has killed 3 people, Cale said. It could kill you in the time it takes you to finish that sentence. So could a lot of things. So could a dropped shipping clamp, and I don't see you ordering the clamp shot. Del picked up her spoon. Look, I get it. On paper I'm the soft one and it's the hard one and you save the soft one. I'd think that too from a command deck. But I'm the one in here and I'm telling you, that animal isn't going to hurt me, and the only way this turns into a body count is if somebody up there gets scared enough to make it one. You want to protect me, Overseer. Hold your fire and let the vet do her job. That's the protection I'm asking for. You are not qualified to assess the threat. I've been assessing threats since before I could read, Del said, and there was something in her voice now, something flat and old that made even Cale pause. Where I grew up, you assessed the threat or you didn't grow up. I know exactly what's standing in my kitchen, Overseer. I knew it the second it walked in. The question isn't whether I understand what it is. The question is whether you understand what I am. She let that sit. And I don't think you do. So maybe listen to your vet, who spent an hour figuring it out, and let the 2 people who actually understand the room handle the room. The command channel was silent. Vess watched the Overseer's silence and understood that something had landed, not agreement. The Vharn didn't do agreement, but the specific stillness of a precise mind encountering a variable it had mise-weighted. Cale had built his math on the human as a soft liability. The human had just calmly informed him that he'd had the sign wrong on the largest term in the equation. Dr. Vess, Cale said at last, I will suspend the order for 1 hour. Not out of sentiment, because I am now uncertain of the variables and I do not execute orders on uncertain variables. That is how one ends up in the record for the wrong reasons. A pause. If at any point the specimen breaches your control or the hour elapses, the order stands and I will key it myself. Are we clear? We're clear, Overseer. Thank you. Do not thank me. Recover your animal, Doctor, and keep your kitchen worker alive. I find I would prefer to read her file at length. The channel closed. On the observation deck, Osk let out a breath. Kovic made his gravel sound, and this time Vess was fairly sure it was a laugh. She threatened the Overseer, Osk said, a little awed. She informed the Overseer, Vess corrected. There's a difference and she knows it, which is more than most diplomats manage. She keyed the galley. Specialist, that bought us an hour. Taro's warming the settler now, 20 minutes. You'll have your injector inside of half an hour. Can it hold? Dell looked at the Morving, which had settled again, jaw down, watching her cook the crew's dinner with the drowsy patience of an animal that had, for the first time in 11 cycles, know where it would rather be and nothing it was afraid of in the immediate vicinity. It can hold, Dell said. It's the calmest it's been since it got here, I'd bet. Question is whether the station holds. She slid the tray back into the warmer. You people build these things 11 jumps from anywhere and then act surprised when there's nobody to fix it fast. Where I'm from, you live an hour from help. You learn to not need it. Where are you from, Specialist? Vess asked. It was not strictly operational, she wanted to know. Dell was quiet for a moment, wiping the counter in slow circles. Harrow's Field, she said. It's a colony world, 3rd wave. My grandparents took a grant and a bad map and a promise the survey was optimistic about. A short breath through the nose, the almost laugh. The survey was optimistic about a lot. Ground's good. Everything that walks on it wants you dead and the weather backs it up. We lost the 1st wave settlement entire before I was born, a bad winter and a worse migration season. They found the houses standing and empty. 2nd wave dug in. 3rd wave learned from the 2nd. She set the rag down. You grow up somewhere like that, you learn the one thing that keeps you breathing, and it isn't a gun, it's this. She nodded slightly at the calm apex predator on her floor. It's not panicking. It's being the steady thing in the room when everything wants you to run, because the running is what gets you eaten. My grandmother buried 2 children on that world and never once raised her voice because she couldn't afford to teach the rest of us that fear was allowed to drive. She picked the rag back up. So no, Doctor, I'm not brave. Brave people get to be scared and do it anyway. I just never learned the panic. It didn't come standard where I'm from. The observation deck was quiet. Vess looked at the small human and thought about the survey ratings that used colors not on the maps, and she understood, finally and completely, what the Conquered had gotten wrong about Earth and its colonies, and about the small, ordinary people who came off them and took contract jobs in galleys 11 jumps from anywhere. They had thought the humans were soft because the humans were small and unarmored, and made of the kind of tissue you could put a needle through. They had never once asked what it took to raise a small, unarmored thing to adulthood on a world that ate you, and what that adulthood was therefore made of. The Morving, which had killed 3 armored handlers, lay on the floor and watched the small, soft human with the total trust of a creature that had, at last, found the biggest predator in the room and decided to stand behind it. Taro, Vess said quietly, how's the settler warming? 16 minutes, Taro's voice came back over the wing channel from the surgical suite. Emulsion's holding, it'll be good. Good, Vess said. Because I want this done right, and I want it done gently. And when the assembly reads the record, I want it to say that we recovered the most dangerous animal in our custody by learning something from a kitchen worker who grew up on a death world. I want that in the record more than I've wanted anything in a long time. There was a small sound from the back of the galley, and Del Varavic's whole body went still in a way it had not gone still for the Morving. It came from the cold store, the walk-in at the back of the galley where she kept the perishables, a heavy insulated door with a manual latch and its own little breathing space. A sound like a knuckle against the inside of the door. 2 taps, then a third, softer. Dell set down her spoon very carefully. She had forgotten Pym. That was the truth of it, and it landed on her cold. In the long, strange hour of the animal, she had forgotten that the shift had started with two of them in the galley, and that when the alarms went and the Morving came through the door, her assistant had not been at the counter. Pym had been in the cold store, breaking down the last of the resupply crates, and the heavy door had been shut against the cold, and a 14-year-old had been sealed in there with the alarms howling, and no idea what was on the other side of the door except that it had made the whole galley go silent. "Doctor," Dell said low, not moving. "I've got a problem, and I need you to not react loud when I tell you, because the animal reads the room off me and I'm about to have to work to keep my read flat." On the observation deck, Vess straightened. "Go ahead." "My assistant's in the cold store, back of the galley. Kid named Pym, station orphan, works my shift, 14 standard, near enough." Dell kept her voice at the exact bored pitch she'd held for the last hour, and it cost her something now because her heart had picked up and the animal would feel that if she let it into her hands. "Been in there the whole time. Sealed door. Kid's just knocked, which means the kid's scared and cold and out of patience. And any second now that kid is going to lose its nerve and come out that door fast. And a scared body moving fast into this room is exactly the thing we agreed we can't have." Vess's stomach dropped. She pulled the galley schematic. The cold store sat at the back of the galley, its door perhaps 4 meters behind the prep island, behind Dell, behind the Morving, in the animal's blind quarter. A frightened juvenile bursting out of it would put a new fast-moving prey signature directly into the awareness of a predator that had spent an hour learning to trust exactly one human and no one else. "Pym species," Vess said. "Tell me fast." "Sethvi, little 4 arms, skittish on a good day, sweet kid. Scared of the recyclers, scared of the dark, scared of..." Dell stopped. "Scared of everything, doctor. That's the point. That kid is the most frightened thing on this station right now, and it's 4 meters behind an apex predator, and I have got to get it out of that box and across this room and out the front without the animal deciding a small scared thing running is a small scared thing worth chasing." "Sethvi, juveniles freeze or bolt," Taro said, reading fast off his slate. "Under threat, freeze or bolt, no middle if it bolts." "If it bolts, the Morven's instinct answers it," Vess finished. Even calm, even trusting Dell. "A bolting prey animal is a reflex, not a decision." She looked at the monitor, at the small human standing very still in her stained apron with a ton of predator between her and a terrified child. "Specialist, what do you need?" "I need you to do the thing you're good at," Dell said. "The talking. Open a line to the cold store, there's a panel inside, comms patch, Pym'll know it. You get the kid on the line and you keep it calm and slow while I get the animal turned. I'm going to put the Morving between me and the front door, facing me, so when Pym comes out, it's coming out behind the animal's head and the animal's watching me, not the door. But that only works if the kid comes out slow. If the kid comes out fast, no choreography saves it." She was already moving, unhurried, drifting around the prep island. "So you keep that kid slow, doctor. You keep it slow if you have to sing to it. I'll handle the ton of teeth. You handle the kid." It was, Vess would think later, the strangest division of labor of her career. The veterinarian talked the child through the door, and the cook managed the apex predator, and neither of them had it backwards, and that was the whole lesson of the day in one sentence. Osk found the cold store patch and opened it, and Vess leaned into the pickup and made her voice the softest thing she owned. "Pym," she said, "my name is Vess. I'm a doctor, and I'm going to help you get out of there, and everything is going to be all right, but I need you to do exactly what I say, and I need you to do it slowly. Can you tell me you understand?" A small voice came back, thin and shaking, 4-part harmonics gone ragged with cold and fear. "There's something came in, I heard it. It's big. I heard it. Is Dell still?" "Dell is fine," Vess said. Dell is standing right there and she's completely fine, and she's the one who's going to walk you out, and there is nothing in that galley that is going to hurt you as long as you move slowly. Do you believe me?" A pause. "No," said the child with the terrible honesty of the very frightened. Vess almost smiled. "That's fair," she said. "You don't have to believe me. You just have to move slowly. Can you do that?" On the monitor, Dell had drifted into position. She stood now near the front of the galley, past the Morving, so that the animal, to keep her in view, which it always did, had turned its great head and shoulders toward the front of the room and away from the cold store. Its blind quarter was now the back of the galley. Dell had put herself where she needed to be and moved a ton of predator into the position she needed it in. And she had done it with nothing but the slow drift of her own body, the way you move stock through a gate by simply standing where the animal doesn't want to be. "Okay, Pim," Dell said, and though she was speaking to the child, her voice never changed pitch, stayed flat and warm and bored because the animal was listening too, and the animal had to hear nothing is wrong. "You're going to open the latch. Nice and slow. When the doors open, you're going to see me and you're going to walk to me, slow as syrup, and you're not going to look at anything but my face. Not the floor, not the walls, not anything else in this room. My face. You look at my face and you walk to me. Can you do that, little bird?" "There's something behind you," the child whispered, because the door had cracked and it had seen. "Dell, there's something." "I know what's behind me," Dell said, easy, unbothered, whisking the fear right out of the air. "It's mine. It's a big, dumb, slow thing, and it does what I say, and right now I'm saying it holds still, so it's holding still. You just come to me, eyes on my face, slow as syrup, come on." Vess watched the cold store door swing wider, and the small four-armed shape of the ScienceFiction child come through it, trembling, into the galley, into the same room as the largest predator in conquered custody. And she watched the Morven's ear flick back toward the new sound, the new scent, the small frightened body at the edge of its blind quarter. And she watched Dell. Because Dell did not tense. Dell did not so much as glance at the child or the animal. Dell kept her eyes soft and her hands loose and her whole body broadcasting the one signal that held the entire fragile architecture together. "This is normal, this is fine. There is nothing here worth the smallest part of your fear." And the Morving, reading its anchor the way it had read her all hour, felt her stay flat, and stayed flat itself. The ear that had flicked back came forward again. The great head stayed oriented on Dell the animal held. The child crossed the galley in slow, shaking steps, eyes locked on Dell's face, 4 small hands pressed flat to its own chest, and it passed within 2 meters of the Morven's flank, close enough to touch, close enough that Vess's own breath stopped, and the Morven did not move. It lay with its jaw down and its eyes on Dell, and it let the small frightened thing walk past it, because the biggest predator in the room had said, with every line of her body, that the small thing was under her protection, and the Morven understood protection. It was the only thing it had ever wanted and never had. Dell caught the child against her, one arm around the small shaking shoulders, and turned it gently toward the front door. And behind them the Morven watched its human hold the little one, and did not so much as lift its head. "Ask," Vess said very quietly. "Front galley door. On my mark you crack it just enough for the child, and you have someone ready to receive it in the corridor, and then you seal it again gently. No noise, no rush." She keyed the galley. "Dell. Front doors opening in 10 seconds, just wide enough. Walk the child to it. Don't hurry." "Never do," Dell said. She walked the ScienceFiction child the last 4 meters to the front of the galley, the way she'd have walked a spooked foal to a barn, slow and steady and murmuring. And the door cracked, and hands reached through. A med tech, Vess saw, ready in the corridor, and the child went through the gap into the arms of someone safe, and the door sealed again with a soft hydraulic sigh. And Del Varovic turned around, alone again in the galley with the apex predator, and let out a breath, and put her hand flat on the Morven's shoulder as she passed it on the way back to her counter. "Good," she told it low. "You did good, you held. I know that wasn't easy, a scared thing running past you and you just let it go. She picked up her spoon. That's more than most people manage. On the observation deck, Adjunct Taro was staring at the monitor with his mouth slightly open. It let prey walk past it, he said. A Class 12 let a bolting Class prey animal walk within 2 meters, and it didn't doctor. That's not conditioning. You can't condition that. That's a whole animal override of a core reflex. It's trust, Vess said. That's all it is. It trusts her more than it trusts its own reflexes. Do you understand what that took? Not from the animal, from her. She held her own fear flat for the 90 seconds it took to walk a terrified child past a predator's jaw, because the second her fear showed, the animals would have followed, and the child would have paid for it. She sat down slowly, because her legs had decided to. I have handlers with 15 years of training who couldn't have kept their reed that flat. She did it in an apron. Osk logged it. Vess saw the entry go up on the sideboard a moment later, and this time the young Celti didn't ask permission for the name. Steadying contact, Event 2. Specimen permitted transit of bolting Class juvenile at 2M no orientation shift. Anchor human maintained flat affect throughout. Recommend formal study. Recommend the entry stopped, and then Osk had added one more line, and Vess read it twice and left it exactly as written. Recommend we learn to do what she does. Taro came back, with the settler cradled against his chest like an egg. He came at a walk that was killing him to keep to a walk, and he handed the little injector case through the observation deck's inner door to Vess, and inside it, nested in gel, was a single-hand injector, thumb-primed, the size of a large stylus, warmed to blood heat, the emulsion holding 1 dose. There was more in the reserve, but there was one warmed and ready, and Vess looked at the small tool that was going to have to do the whole job on the first try, and felt the weight of it out of all proportion to its mass. 1 shot, she said. 1 shot warmed, Taro said. If she misses the soft tissue, or if it spikes and burns the dose, the next warmed dose is 20 minutes out, and we won't have 20 minutes because a spiked animal doesn't give them back. He swallowed. It has to go right the first time, doctor, and the person putting it in has had no training and 1 hour of acquaintance with the animal. She's had a lifetime of acquaintance with the animal, Vess said. Just not this one. She closed the case. The problem isn't her hand. The problem is getting the injector to her hand without spooking the thing that's decided the galley is the one safe place in the universe. Because that was the next wall, and it was a real one. The injector was in the observation deck. Dell was in the galley. Between them was a corridor and a sealed door, and the fact that the Morven would let precisely one living creature approach it. And that creature was already inside the galley, and could not leave it to fetch the tool without unraveling everything. Serving hatch, Osk said. There's a serving hatch galley to mess corridor. It's how the food goes out. Small, chest-high, hinged shutter. We could pass the injector through the hatch and she takes it from the mess side without anyone entering the galley proper. The hatch is in the animal's field of view, Taro said. If a hand comes through a hole in the wall near her, then the hand has to be a hand it can tolerate, Vess said, or a hand it never sees, and there's no hand it never sees, because she has to take the injector from it in plain view. She looked at the case in her hands. She looked at the monitor, at the Morven, at the flat plate flare, at the animal's total orientation on the one small human. It has to be a hand the animal reads as under her authority. Which means it can't be mine and it can't be a handler's because it doesn't know us and we smell of the wing and the box. She was quiet a moment. It has to be someone she vouches for, out loud, so the animal hears her vouch. And into the silence, Warden Kovac said, "It should be me." Vess turned. The Brax had not moved from the back of the observation deck in an hour, 4 arms folded, 4 eyes flat, and Vess had half forgotten him the way you forget a mountain in the window. Now he unfolded, and the observation deck seemed smaller for it. "You," Vess said. It has to be someone the record can't question, Kovic said. If a junior handler passes that hatch and it goes wrong, the overseer buries this whole recovery as reckless, and your kitchen worker's name goes in the record as a fatality caused by your negligence. If I pass it, the warden of the fauna wing, the man with the clemency negative on his own slate, then the record shows the recovery was run by the book, with the ranking officer taking the risk himself. He was already moving toward the door. And there's the other reason. Which is? Kovic stopped. His 4 eyes went for a moment somewhere else, somewhere 11 cycles back. I wrote the letters, he said, 3 of them, to a bondmaid on Brax, to a clutch parent on the rings, to a Celti creche that had raised a handler from an egg. I wrote 3 letters telling 3 families that the specimen had killed the person they loved, and that we were keeping the specimen anyway because it was valuable. His voice did not rise. It went flatter, which for a Brax was worse. I have wanted that animal dead for 11 cycles, doctor. I have keyed the clemency negative in my sleep. And I have watched a kitchen worker spend an hour proving that the thing I wanted to kill was never a monster. It was a frightened animal in a box we built wrong, that killed 3 people who reached for it the wrong way, because reaching for it the wrong way was all we ever taught it the galaxy would do. He looked at the injector case in Vess's hands. So it should be me who passes the needle that puts it down easy. Because I'm the one who spent 11 cycles wanting to put it down hard, and I was wrong. And a man who was wrong should be the one to do the thing right when he finally gets the chance. Give me the injector, doctor, and tell the human to vouch for me loud, because I would like, for once, to walk up to that animal and have it not be afraid of me. The observation deck was silent. Vess handed him the case. Dell took the news the way she took all of it, which was to keep cooking while she thought. The warden, she repeated. The big 4-armed one. He wants to bring me the needle himself. He does, Vess said. And there are good reasons, and I'll tell you all of them, but the short one is that he's the ranking officer, and if he takes the risk, the record protects you, and the long one is that he's earned it and I'd like him to have it. She paused. But it's your galley and your animal and your reed. If you don't want him near, we find another way. Dell looked at the Morving. She looked at it for a while. He smells like the box, she said finally. Doesn't he? He's been in and out of that cell for cycles. The animal's going to know his smell the second the hatch opens. The smell of the place it was afraid. Vess had not thought of that, and it was exactly right. And she felt the familiar vertigo of being outtreed by the kitchen worker for the 6th time in an hour. Yes, she admitted. It probably will. Then that's the whole job, isn't it? Dell set the spoon down. It's not passing the needle. It's the animal meeting the smell of the box up close, attached to a body, and me telling it that the box smell is safe now. That's the thing you actually need. Because if it can learn that the box smell is okay when I say it's okay, then it can go back in the box without it being the end of the world. She wiped her hands slowly. Your warden doesn't just want to hand me a needle, doctor. He wants the animal to forgive him, and the animal can't do that. But it can do the next thing, which is trust me enough to be calm around the thing that scares it, that we can work with. Vess closed her eyes for a moment. 31 years, and she was learning her own profession from a woman who fed people for a living. Bring him, Dell said. But you tell him the rules. He comes to the hatch slow. He opens it slow. He puts the injector on the sill and he takes his hand back. He doesn't reach in. He doesn't reach toward the animal. He doesn't try to make peace with it because it can't take peace from him yet. And if he reaches for it, it'll read the reach the way it read every reach that ever heard it. He puts the needle down and he takes his hand back and he lets me do the rest. Can he do that? A man who's wanted this thing dead for cycles. Can he stand a body length from it and not reach? Vess looked at Kovic, who had heard all of it over the open channel, and the warden's 4 eyes were fixed on the monitor, on the animal, and there was something working in the great slate face that Vess had never seen there in the years she'd known him. I can stand still, Kovic said, quiet. It's the one thing I've always been able to do. He went to the hatch alone. Vess watched it on 2 feeds at once. the corridor cam showing the warden's huge armored shape approaching the serving hatch at a slow, deliberate walk, the injector case in one of 4 hands, and camera 9 showing the galley, the human at her counter, the Morven on the floor, and the small hinged shutter set into the wall that was about to open onto the smell of everything the animal feared. "He's coming to the hatch," Del told the Morven, low and even, standing where the animal could see her, her hands loose. "Somebody you won't like, smells like the cold place. But he's mine right now, you understand. He's under me, same as the little bird. He's mine and he's safe and you're going to hold." She kept her eyes on the animal. "Warden, slow now. Slow as you've got." Kovic reached the hatch. He put one huge hand flat against the shutter and slid it up slow, and the galley opened to him through a chest-high square, and the Morven's head came up off the deck. Vess saw it read the smell. She saw the exact instant, the great jaw lifting, the nostrils working, the plate flare rippling up along the flanks as 11 cycles of cold and dark and pain came off the warden's armor and hit the animal in the one sense it trusted most. The Morven came half up onto its forelegs, and a sound came out of it that Vess had heard exactly 3 times before, each time over a body, a low subsonic pressure that the galley pickup rendered as a hiss of static because it couldn't reproduce the frequency, a sound that meant the animal had stopped being afraid and started being something else. "Del," Vess said sharp. "I've got it." Del hadn't moved. Del had not so much as shifted her weight. She stood 4 meters from a rising, flaring apex predator with the smell of its nightmares in the air, and she put every ounce of the flat, bored, iron calm she'd been holding all hour into 2 words. "Hey, me." The Morven's head snapped toward her. "Me," Del said again, and she tapped her own sternum twice, a gesture the animal had watched her make a dozen times over the last hour without knowing it was learning it. "Look at me, not the smell, me. The smell's mine now. I brought it in. It's fine because I say it's fine." Her voice never rose and never sped. Down. For one long second, the galley hung on the edge. Then the Morven came down off its forelegs, slow, its eyes locked on the small human, the plate flare sinking back to flat by degrees, and it put its jaw back on the deck, and it held there, trembling with the smell of the box in its nose and the human's voice in its ears. And it chose, visibly, effortfully, chose the human over the fear. "Good," Del breathed. "Oh, that's good, that's so good." "Look at you," she let out a slow breath. "Warden, needle on the sill, nice and easy, then hand back." Kovic set the injector on the hatch sill. His hand did not shake, and Vess knew what that stillness cost because she could see, on the corridor feed, that the warden's 4 eyes had not left the animal, and that in them was not fear and not hate but something Vess had no clean word for, the particular grief of a man looking at a creature he'd wanted to destroy and finally, far too late, understanding it. He took his hand back. He did not reach. He stood a body length from the animal that had killed 3 of his people, with a hatch open between them, and he did not reach for it. And after a moment he said, low, in the Brax register that the pickup barely caught, "I'm sorry. For the box, for all of it." And then, quieter, "You were never the monster, we were just bad at listening." The Morven did not understand the words, but it heard the tone, the way it heard all tone, and it looked at the huge grieving shape in the hatch, and it did not flare, and it did not hiss, and that was as much forgiveness as an animal had to give, and it was more than the warden had expected, and Vess watched him take it like a blow. "Hands back, Warden," Del said gently. "Well done. Now hold the hatch open just like that and stay still. I'm going to go get my needle." And she walked, unhurried, past the apex predator to the hatch and picked up the injector, and the whole station held its breath. Del carried the injector back to the counter, not to the animal. She wanted her hands sure before she used them, and sure hands came from doing an ordinary thing. So she set the injector on the cutting board and she picked up a towel and she dried her palms, slow, 1 finger at a time, the way her grandmother had dried her hands before setting a broken bone or turning a breached dray in the dark. "Talk me through it, doctor," she said. "Every step. And then I'm going to do it, and I'd rather you didn't talk during because I'll be listening to the animal, not to you. But before every step. Now." Vess talked her through it. The seam of hide behind the left foreleg. Flat contact. The injector pressed flush. No angle, no jab, because a jab read as a bite and a bite ended everything. Thumb the primer, then the plunger, a smooth long press. Hold the 3 count so the whole dose delivered, withdraw straight back. Then hand stay on the animal. 4 to 6 minutes. The settler would make the Morvin's limbs heavy first, then its eyelids, then its will to move, and somewhere in the middle of that the animal would feel the wrongness of its own body and would be afraid. And that was the minute that mattered, and Dell's hands could not leave the shoulder during it, no matter what. "And specialist," Vess said, "I want to tell you something and then I'll go quiet." "Go." "I've made this bet before. The bet that the animal is more than the teeth. I've won it a great many times." Vess looked at the monitor, at the small human drying her hands. "I've lost it twice. 2 animals I believed in, that I stood up for the way I've stood up for this one, and they turned, and people were hurt. And I went to the incinerator both times and I stood there while it burned, because that's what it costs to make this bet. And I've never once told an adjunct they had to make it too. A breath. I'm not going to pretend I know this one goes the other way. I believe it does. My whole 31 years is standing up and saying it does. But you're the one whose hand is on it, and you're the one who pays if I'm wrong, and I will not have you do this thinking it's certain. It isn't. It's a bet. I need you to make it with your eyes open." Dell finished drying her hands. She folded the towel and set it down square, the way you set a thing down when you've decided. "Doctor," she said, "I appreciate that, I do, but you've got it turned around same as everybody up there." She picked up the injector. "You think I'm making a bet on the animal? I'm not. I stopped betting on animals when I was 9 and a field cat took my uncle off the porch in front of me because he ran and I didn't. Animals aren't a bet. Animals are just weather, they do what they do, and you read them right or you read them wrong, and the reading isn't hope, it's a skill, and I've got the skill." She turned toward the Morvin. "I'm not betting this thing won't turn. I'm telling you it won't, the same way I'd tell you a storm's 2 hours out. I could be wrong about a storm. I'm not wrong about this. So keep your incinerator cold, doctor. We're not going to need it today." And she walked to the animal. On the observation deck, nobody breathed. Vess had muted her own channel and gripped the edge of the console, and beside her Taro had the reversal agents in his hands, useless from here. And behind her Kovic stood at the hatch on the corridor feed, huge and still. And somewhere on the command deck overseer Kale watched with his thumb. Vess had no doubt, resting near the confirmation. And every one of them watched the small human in the stained apron cross the last 2 meters to a Class 12 apex predator with a needle in her hand, and no armor and no weapon, and nothing at all but the thing her grandmother had given her instead of fear. Dell knelt at the Morvin's left shoulder. She did not go for the injector first. She put her empty hand flat on the plating, the way she had all hour, and she left it there, and the animal, which had been tracking her approach with its half-lidded eyes, let out the long bridge rumble sigh and let its head go heavy on the deck. She stroked the shoulder once down and back. She murmured something the pickup didn't catch. She found the seam of hide behind the foreleg with 2 fingers of her empty hand, mapping it again, gentle, and the Morvin sighed again and did not tense. Then she brought the injector down into contact with her other hand, flush against the soft hide, and she never stopped stroking with the first hand, and she never stopped murmuring, and Vess watched the human's thumb move the primer, then the plunger, the long, smooth press. And she watched the Morvin's ear flick at the sting, the small, sharp wrongness of it, the ear coming up, the head starting to lift. "Easy," Dell said, and pressed her forehead for just a second against the great slate shoulder. "Easy, big man, that's the worst of it. That's the whole worst of it right there, and it's already done. I'm here, hands right here. I'm not going anywhere." The 3 count finished. Dell withdrew the injector, straight back, and set it on the deck, and put both hands flat on the shoulder and stayed. "It's in," she said, not loud. "It's in," and it held. "Clock's running, Doctor. 6 minutes. Nobody make a sound up there. This is the part where I earn my dinner." The first minute was nothing, and nothing was the worst thing it could be, because the animal did not yet feel the settler, and Dell had to simply kneel there with her hands on a ton of predator and wait for a drug to start turning the tide, trusting a chemistry she couldn't feel and a read she couldn't verify. The second minute, the Morven's breathing changed. Vess saw it on the monitor, and on the vitals patch Taro had somehow gotten a remote sensor to hold against the animal's flank an hour ago. The respiration slowing, deepening, the arousal markers ticking down. The settler was working. The third minute was the bad one. It came the way Vess had known it would, the way it always came. The animal's body began, quietly, to betray it. Its forelegs, when it shifted them, did not answer the way they should. The heaviness came into the limbs first, exactly as the pharmacology promised. And the Morven, an animal whose entire life had been its body, whose every survival had come from the perfect answering of muscle to will, felt its own strength going soft and did not understand why. And there is no fear in any nervous system on any world worse than the fear of your own body failing you. The plate flare rippled up. The head came off the deck, the great jaw parted. The vitals patch spiked, arousal climbing, the settler and the fear racing each other. And for one terrible moment Vess could not tell which was winning, and Taro's hands closed white around the reversal agents, and on the corridor feed Kovic went rigid at the hatch, and on the command channel a light bloomed as Overseer Kale's thumb found the confirmation and hovered. And Del Varovic put both arms around the neck of a rising, terrified apex predator, and laid the whole small weight of her body against it, and spoke into the plating in a voice that did not have 1 gram of fear in it, because she had spent 30-something years making sure it never would. "No, no, no, stay with me, I know. I know it feels wrong, it feels like you're going under and you don't know why, and everything in you says fight it, don't fight it. Don't fight it, big man, I've got you, I've got you. Your legs are supposed to go heavy. That's me. That's the medicine I gave you, and it's going to take you down somewhere soft, and I'm going to be right here the whole way down and right there when you wake up, and the place you wake up is going to be warm this time. Warm. I promise you, warm." Her voice cracked once and steadied, because even Del Varovic was only made of what she was made of. "You held for the little bird. You held for the box smell. Hold for this. It's the last hard thing. Then you sleep. Easy, easy, easy." And the Morven, with its body going soft beneath it and its whole ancient instinct screaming to fight the softness, looked for its anchor and found her, wrapped around its neck unafraid, the one constant thing in a life of cold and dark and pain, and it stopped fighting. It let the heaviness take it. Vess watched the plate flare sink. She watched the great head lower by degrees back to the deck, the human's arms lowering with it, cradling it down. She watched the vitals patch tick down and down, arousal collapsing, the settler winning the last of the race, the animal's eyes going to slits and then, slowly, closing. She watched a Class 12 apex predator, 3 confirmed kills, 11 cycles of terror, fall asleep on a galley floor in the arms of a kitchen worker who was telling it, over and over, that the next place it woke would be warm. "Arousal's bottomed," Taro whispered. "It's under the settler. It's drowsy, not out, but it's under. Doctor, it's ready for the primary. It's ready for the dart." Vess keyed the corridor channel. Her voice was not entirely steady, and she did not much care. "Warden," she said, "on the human's word, not mine." "Hers." And in the galley, Del Varovic knelt with a sleeping predator's head in her lap and her hand moving slow on its jaw, and she looked up at last, at the serving hatch, at the huge still shape of the warden waiting there with the dart gun he'd loaded himself, and she nodded once. "Do it clean," she said. "It's earned clean, and warden, you aim for the same spot my hand's been. It knows that spot's safe now. Let the last thing it feels be the safe spot. She bent her head back down to the animal. Go to sleep, big man, warm place, I promised. Kovic raised the dart gun. He sighted along the barrel, 4 eyes narrowed, at the seam of hide behind the foreleg where the human's hand had rested for an hour. And Vess saw the warden's finger settle on the trigger with the care of a man diffusing something. And the whole station hung, silent, on the last 3 seconds of the longest hour of its life. The dart crossed the galley, in the time it takes to decide not to blink. It struck the seam of hide behind the foreleg, the safe spot, the human spot, and the Morven's flank twitched, a single small ripple and then nothing. No spike, no flare, no lunge. The animal was already 3/4 under the settler, cradled in the human's lap with the human's hand on its jaw, and the primary sedative went into a body that had already, on the human's word, decided to sleep. There was no fight left to have. The last thing the Morven felt was the safe spot, and a hand, and a voice telling it the next place would be warm. Vess watched the vitals patch on the flank slide down the last distance into true sedation, respiration long and slow, arousal at floor, the great body going wholly slack. And she realized she was gripping Taro's arm hard enough to leave marks, and that Taro was gripping hers, and that neither of them had noticed. It's down, Taro breathed. It's fully down. Doctor, it's down, and the arousal never crossed threshold. Not once after she got her arms around it. The whole go-down was under threshold. That's a textbook sedation. That's better than textbook. I've never brought a Class 12 down that clean with a full team and a chute, and it just happened on a galley floor because a cook told it the next place would be warm, Vess said. Her voice did something and she let it. Yes, it did. On the monitor, Del Varovic sat very still for a moment with the sleeping animal's head in her lap. Then she let out a long breath, the longest Vess had seen her take, and she bowed her head over the Morven and stayed like that, one hand on its jaw, for the space of 5 or 6 seconds. The only 5 or 6 seconds in the whole hour that the human had spent on herself. And then she straightened, and wiped her face once with the back of her wrist, and became, again, the flat, unbothered woman who had refused to leave her sauce. It's asleep, she said to the room, to the cameras, to the station. It went down easy and it went down safe and nobody has to shoot anything. So, whatever your recovery is, come do it and be gentle, because it's going to wake up in a few hours and I told it the next place would be warm, and I don't lie to animals. She eased the great head off her lap and onto a folded stack of galley towels, cushioning it against the deck, and stood, her knees cracking, and put her hands on the small of her back. And somebody get me an update on my crew's dinner situation, because it's 4 hours late and I've got 9 people who have been locked in cells all afternoon, and they are going to be hungry. The recovery took 40 minutes and it was, Vess thought, the gentlest handling of a Class 12 in the history of the fauna wing, because everyone who did it had watched the last hour, and none of them could bear to be the one who was rough. The suited team came in through the front, slow, and Del stood by the animal's head the whole time and talked to it though it couldn't hear, low and even, telling it what was happening. Sling under you now, big man. That's just the strap. Nobody's hurting you, up you go, because she'd said she'd be there when it went down and she was not going to leave until it was carried out, and no one on the team was fool enough to argue with her. They slung the Morven, all its slate tonnage, onto a powered litter, and its head lolled deeply under, and the recovery lead, a veteran handler named Suk who had, Vess knew, nearly been the 4th fatality 2 cycles back, reached out without thinking, and steadied that lolling head with one gloved hand, gentle as with a sleeping child, and then looked down at his own hand doing it and had to stop and stand still for a moment. Warm cell, Del reminded them, walking beside the litter to the galley door no farther because she'd said she wouldn't leave her station and she hadn't, not once, all hour. She walked the animal to the threshold and stopped exactly at the line where her galley ended. You promised it warm. Ask, was it? You warmed that cell. It's warm, Osk's voice came over the corridor speaker thick. I brought it up to Thren Standard an hour ago. It's home range. It'll wake up thinking it's home. Warm ground in the low field on soft, and I put down bedding specialist. I know we don't usually. I put down bedding. Good lad, Del said. And then to the animal as the litter carried it past her, out of her galley, down the corridor toward the wing, warm place, big man. Told you. I don't lie to animals. She stood in her doorway and watched the litter until it turned the corner and was gone, and only then did she turn back into her galley and pick up her spoon and look at the ruined, hours-cold remains of a shift meal she had defended against an apex predator and lost to time. Well, she said to the tabby which had reappeared on the warm proofing box, that's supper wrecked, start again. And she started again. Overseer Kale was waiting on the command channel when Vess finally sat down, and for a long moment the Viharn said nothing, which from Kale was a kind of speech. The specimen is recovered, he said at last. Non-lethal, no loss of personnel. The clemency negative is stood down, and I have entered into the record that it was suspended on my authority pending resolution, which resolved favorably. A pause. You will note that I have not entered that it was suspended because a kitchen worker instructed me to reconsider my variables. That would not survive review, and it would not serve her. The record will say the suspension was a command judgment. Let it. That's generous, Overseer. It is accurate. I did make the judgment. I merely made it because she was right, which the record does not require me to specify. Another pause longer. Doctor, I have spent an hour watching a soft-bodied animal from a colony world do something my entire compliance framework says is impossible, which is to render a Class 12 apex predator tractable through nothing but the regulation of her own affect. My framework rates threat by mass, armament, and kill history. By that framework, she is the least dangerous thing on this station, and the specimen was the most dangerous. And I have just watched the least dangerous thing on this station walk the most dangerous thing on this station to sleep by talking to it. He let that sit. My framework is wrong. I do not enjoy discovering that my framework is wrong, but I did not survive to become an overseer by refusing to update on evidence, and the evidence is on 9 cameras. A rustle, the Viharn equivalent of a settling of feathers. I am going to request her file from Harrow's Field. The full one. I suspect the Assembly has badly misweighted an entire category of citizen, and I would like to be the one who tells them so, because being the one who corrects the record is how a person like me stays useful. You could just tell them, Vess said, that we should listen to the humans. That is not a sentence that survives review either, Doctor, Kale said, yet, and the channel closed. Vess sat back. On the wing feed, the recovery team was settling the Morven into its rewarmed cell. She could see it on the monitor, the great slate body easing down onto Osk's improvised bedding, the low field soft, the temperature up, the whole environment for the first time in 11 cycles configured not to contain the animal but to comfort it. The Morven slept. Its plate flare was flat. Its breathing was long and slow, and its great jaw rested on the bedding, and there was nothing in the frame that looked like a weapon in a box. There was only a sleeping animal in a warm room. Taro, Vess said, when it wakes, I want a handler in the observation gallery, not the cell. I don't want the first thing it sees on waking to be one of us leaning over it. I want warm and quiet and alone and food in the trough and time. We've been trying to make it accept us as senior for 11 cycles by putting ourselves over it. We had it backwards. You don't earn a frightened animal's trust by looming. You earn it by being the calm thing in the room and letting the animal come to you. She almost laughed. A kitchen worker just taught me that, and I've a doctorate. I'm writing it down, Taro said, and he was. His crest had gone a color Vess had rarely seen on him, a deep settled tone that on a Celti meant something close to reverence. Doctor, I've been logging her techniques all hour. The flat affect, the steadying contact, the way she never let her own arousal into her hands. The vouching, the way she told it a new body was under her authority before she let the body approach. There's a whole handling methodology in what she did today, and none of it's in any manual we have, and all of it works on a class 12, which nothing in our manuals does. He looked up. I want to write it up, formally, as protocol. I want to name it after, I don't know what to name it after. Her word. The one that doesn't translate. Steadying, Vess said. Steadying? Taro turned it over. The steadying method, handler core supplemental. Section 1. The handler's own comm is the primary instrument. Section 2. He stopped and gave a small helpless laugh. Section 2 is going to be very hard to teach, isn't it? Because Section 2 is don't be afraid. And we can't teach that. She didn't learn it in a course. She learned it burying people on a world that ate them, and you can't put that in a supplemental. No, Vess agreed. But you can put in the supplemental that it exists, that there are people in the Concord who have it, and that when you find one you should give them a great deal of professional respect and a wide berth and ideally a needle and an hour, and then you should get out of their way and log what they do. She stood. Write it, Taro, name it steadying, and put her name on it, Varovic. So that in 10 cycles, when some adjunct asks where the method came from, the answer is a provisioning specialist, grade 2, who wouldn't leave her station for a class 12 because she had a sauce to finish. She'll hate that, Taro said, having her name on it. She'll hate it enormously, Vess agreed. Put it on anyway, some debts you pay whether or not the person wants them paid. The lockdown lifted at the 18th hour, and the 9 skeleton crew came out of their cells stiff and frightened and hungry. And they came, all of them, by instinct or by rumor to the galley. Because the galley was where the food was, and because word had gone around the station the way word did, and they wanted to see the woman who had done the thing with their own eyes. They found her plating dinner. Vess came down in person. She told herself it was to assess the specialist for stress injury, which was true and was not the reason. The reason was that she had spent an hour watching a small human on a screen do something that had rearranged 31 years of her professional certainty, and she wanted to stand in a room with her and see whether she was real. She was real, and she was smaller in person than the cameras had made her, and she was up to her elbows in a fresh pot of something that smelled, even to Vess's alien senses, deeply and specifically good, and she did not stop working when the vet came in. Dr. Vess, Dell said without looking up, I know your voice. Sit down, you look like you've aged a season. There's tea in the pot on the left, the one that doesn't leak. Crew eats first, then staff, then whatever vets wander in off the wing. You're bottom of that list, but I'll feed you because you kept your warden's finger off the button, and that's worth a bowl. Vess sat. Around her the skeleton crew ate, subdued at first then, as the food and the safety sank in louder, the specific loud relief of people who had spent a day certain they might die and had not. The Sethvi child, Pim, sat wrapped in a thermal blanket at the end of the counter, close to Dell, 4 small hands around a mug, watching the cook work with the fixed devotion of a young thing that has been saved and knows exactly by whom. Dell set a bowl in front of the child without being asked and put a hand on the small head for a moment as she passed, and the child leaned into it, and neither of them said anything, and it was, Vess thought, the whole thing in miniature, the human as the calm center that the frightened orbited. You didn't leave, Vess said. It wasn't a question. She'd watched it for an hour and she still didn't fully understand it. At any point in the last 11 hours, you could have gone out the front the moment it lay down and let us handle it, and no one would have thought less of you. You never even tried. You stayed at that counter and you cooked. Dell wiped down the rim of a bowl. Where would I have gone? Anywhere, a cell. Safety. And leave a scared animal in my galley for your warden to shoot and 9 people locked up with no dinner and Pim sealed in a cold box. Dell shook her head. There wasn't anywhere to go, Doctor. That's what I keep trying to tell your people and none of you can hear it. There wasn't a version where I left. Leaving would have been the panic. I told you I don't do the panic. It didn't come standard. She ladled another bowl. And besides, I had a sauce on. Vess looked at her. You stayed, she said slowly. in a room with the most dangerous animal in conquered custody, and refused to be moved from your post by an apex predator that has killed 3 of my handlers. And when I ask you why, the answer is that you had a sauce on. The answer is that I had a sauce on and nowhere better to be and no reason to think the animal was going to hurt me, Dell said. The sauce is just the part that sounds good. You'll notice I did finish it. She almost smiled, the first real one Vess had seen. That's the version that ought to go in your report, Doctor, if you want the honest one. Not that I was brave. That I was busy and I looked up, and there was a scared thing in my kitchen. And I did what you do with a scared thing in your kitchen, which is you tell it to lie down and you keep working so it can see there's nothing worth being scared about. That's not courage. That's how you were raised, or it isn't. I was. Warden Kovic came in near the end, when the crew had thinned, and the child had fallen asleep against the counter, and Dell was scrubbing the big pot. He filled the galley door the way the Morvin had, and for a moment Vess saw Dell glance at the doorway and go still, not afraid, but reading, the way she read everything. And then she relaxed and went back to the pot, because whatever she read in the warden's 4-armed bulk, it wasn't a threat. Specialist, Kovic said. Warden, there's a bowl kept warm for you on the pass. You handed me that needle steady as a surgeon, and you didn't reach for the animal when everything in you wanted to. That's worth more than a bowl, but a bowl's what I've got. She didn't turn around. Sit down before you fall down. You've been standing at that hatch for 2 hours. I watched you on the little screen. Kovic did not sit. He stood in the middle of the galley, huge and awkward in a way Vess had never seen a Brax be, and he was quiet for a while, and then he said, in the flat Brax register that meant he was working hard to keep his voice level. I wrote 3 letters. I told you that over the channel, 3 families. He paused. I've spent 11 cycles believing that the thing that killed those handlers was a monster, because if it was a monster then it was no one's fault, and the letters could say the animal was simply dangerous, and everyone could grieve cleanly. His 4 eyes fixed on the middle distance. You proved today that it was never a monster. It was a frightened animal in a box we built wrong, that struck out at people who reached for it the only way we ever taught it to expect, with force and cold and shock prods. Which means the deaths weren't a monster's nature, they were our mistakes. He looked finally at the small human at the sink. You've made the grief harder, Specialist. It was cleaner when it was a monster, now it's on us. I wanted you to know I know that. And that I'd rather have the hard grief and the truth than the clean grief and the lie. So, thank you, though it doesn't feel like a thing to be thanked for. Dell turned off the tap. She dried her hands on the towel over her shoulder, and she looked at the warden for a long moment. And when she spoke, her voice had lost the flat board edge it had held for 11 hours and gone somewhere quieter. You want to know something, Warden, she said. Where I'm from, we lost the whole first settlement, before I was born. Bad winter, worse migration season, the local herds came through where the houses were and the walls weren't built for it and everyone inside died. And for years, the second wave told it as a story about the monsters. The beasts that came in the dark and took the settlement. Made the dead into people who'd been ambushed by something evil. She hung the towel back up. And then my grandmother's generation went back and looked, really looked, at where the houses were built, and they realized the settlement had been put right across a migration road that had been there 10,000 years, and the herds hadn't come to kill anyone. The herds had just come, the way they always came, and the houses were in the way. And that was so much worse, Warden, because it meant it hadn't been monsters. It had been a map read wrong. It had been our mistake. She met his 4 eyes without flinching. But you know what my grandmother said? She said thank the ground for the hard truth, because the clean lie would have built the next settlement on the road too. The hard truth is the only kind you can build on, so build on it. Move your houses off the road. That's all any of us can do with a mistake, learn the road and move the houses. She picked up a bowl and pressed it into 2 of his 4 hands. Now sit down and eat, because you look like a man who's just found out the ground was never his enemy, and that's a lot to stand up under. Sit. Kovic said. Vess watched the warden of the fauna wing, all his mass and armor and 11 cycles of hard-won hatred, sit down on a galley bench and eat a bowl of a human's cooking with his 4 eyes wet, and she thought that she had come down here to see whether the woman on the screen was real, and that she had her answer, and that the answer was going to reorganize a great deal more than her professional certainty. Specialist, she said, when you're done here and only when you're done, I've learned that much today, I'd like to talk to you about the wing, about the specimen, about what happens next. Dell wrung out the dishcloth and hung it to dry and looked around her galley, the sleeping child, the eating warden, the fed crew, the tabby back on its warm box, the clean pots, the pilot light burning low and steady under the empty stove. It's not going to be a job offer, is it? She said. Because I'll save you the trouble. I'm a cook, doctor. I'm a good one. I like it. I'm not a handler and I'm not going to be, and if you try to make me the wing's tame human who talks the animals down, you'll ruin the one thing that made today work, which is that I wasn't anybody's handler. I was just a person who wasn't afraid, doing an ordinary job when a scared thing walked in. She untied her apron. So no, whatever it is. But sit, I'll hear it. And there's one more bowl and it's got your name on it, and I don't let good food go cold. Not for an overseer, not for a warden, and not, as it turns out, for an apex predator. She set the bowl down in front of Vess. Eat, doctor. You've earned it. You kept the finger off the button. What Vess proposed over the bowl was not a job. Dell was right about that, and Vess had known she'd be right, which was half of why she respected her. I don't want to make you a handler, Vess said. You told me why that would ruin it, and you're correct. What I want is to change how the wing works, and I want to be able to say, when the assembly asks me why, that the change came from watching you. She turned the bowl in her hands. For 11 cycles we handled that animal by being the biggest thing in the room. Armor, shock prods, numbers, the low field crank to keep it flat. We stood over it. We treated every specimen like a threat to be dominated, because that's what the manual said, and the manual was written by people who'd never met an animal they couldn't dominate and never met a person who could do what you did. She set the bowl down. Today the wing's most dangerous specimen went to sleep in the arms of the one person on the station who never once stood over it, who knelt down beside it and let it come to her. I want to rebuild the whole handling doctrine around that, and I want your name on the method, and I don't want a single hour of your time in a cell, because the method only works if the person doesn't want to be a handler. That's the paradox I'm going to have to explain to the assembly, and I'd like your help explaining it over a bowl whenever you have one going spare. Dell considered that. She scratched the tabby, which had climbed into her lap the moment she sat under the chin. That I can do, she said. You bring your handlers down here a few at a time and I'll cook, and they can watch how a person acts when they're not scared, and maybe some of it takes. She said it dryly. Won't take on all of them. Some people, the fear's in the bones and you can't teach it out, but some. And some's better than none. Some's how you change a road. She looked at the vet. But I'll tell you the thing you're going to have the hardest time putting in your manual, doctor, and you should put it in anyway, right at the front in big letters. Tell me. You can't fake it. Dell held her gaze. The animal knows. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing the animal always knows. You can hold your body still and keep your voice flat and go through every motion of calm, and if underneath it you're afraid, the animal reads it off your scent, off your heartbeat, off 100 things you can't fake and don't even know you're doing. Your handlers spent 11 cycles performing calm at that thing while their bodies screamed threat, and it read the scream every time, and that's why it killed them, not because it was a monster, but because they lied to it with their bodies and it caught the lie. She set the cat down. So you can teach the motions, but the motions are the last 10%. The first 90 is actually not being afraid, and you can't teach that in a wing. That comes from a whole life. Mine came from a world that would have killed me if I'd learned anything else. I don't know where your handlers are going to get it. A pause. But you can at least stop teaching them the opposite. You can stop handing a scared person a shock prod and telling them the fear is fine as long as they've got the bigger weapon. Because the bigger weapon is what tells the animal you're afraid. Nobody brings the big stick unless they're scared of what it's for. Vess sat with that for a long moment. Then she took out her slate and in front of the human began to write it down. The bigger weapon, she read aloud as she wrote, is itself a fear signal. A handler who arms up has already told the animal it is prey or predator, and the animal will answer in kind. Steadying method, section 1, first line. She looked up. I'm putting your name on it. I'll hate that. I know, Taro told me. I'm doing it anyway. The Morvin woke, 11 hours later in a warm cell. Vess was in the observation gallery for it. Alone, the lights down. No handler looming, exactly as she'd ordered. She watched the great slate body stir on Osk's bedding, watched the eyes come open, watched the animal do the thing every sedated predator does on waking, which is to lie still and take a careful inventory of the world to learn what has changed and what will hurt. Nothing hurt. The cell was warm, Thren warm, the temperature of the world where it had once sat at the top of everything. The low field was soft, not the hard, flat pressure the wing had used to keep it dull, but the gentle setting Vess had spent the night calibrating. There was bedding which there had never been. There was food in the trough, fresh and water, and there was no one standing over it. The animal lifted its head and found the world, for the first time in 11 cycles, configured to comfort it rather than contain it. And Vess watched the plate flare which had risen on waking, sink slowly back to flat. The Morvin ate. It drank. It circled the bedding once, the way an animal circles before it settles, a behavior the wing had never once seen because the wing had never given it anything soft to settle on. And then it lay down and put its jaw on the bedding, and its eyes went a half-mast, and it slept again, not the crashing chemical sleep of the sedative, but the ordinary sleep of an animal that has decided, for now, that the world is not going to hurt it. Vess sat in the dark gallery and watched it sleep, and she did not realize she was weeping the slow, selty way, the clear film across the eyes, until it blurred the monitor. 31 years, she said to no one, and I never once thought to make the box warm. The wing changed slowly, the way real things change. Taro wrote the supplement and named it the steadying method and put Varavik on the first page. And Del hated it exactly as much as everyone had predicted and refused to attend the briefing where it was presented, on the grounds that she had bread proofing. The handlers came down to the galley in 1s and 2s, off shift, and Del fed them and let them watch her be unbothered, and talked to them sometimes about the field cats and the drays and her grandmother, and some of it took and some of it didn't, exactly as she'd said. The comic part, because there was always a comic part, and Vess came to treasure it, was watching alien handlers try to import human domesticity into the fauna wing, as if calm were a technology they could install. A young handler named Retta, who had taken the method to heart with the fervor of the newly converted, began playing galley sounds in the specimen cells. The clink of crockery, the low burble of a pot, the ordinary domestic noise of a place where nothing was wrong. It was, Vess had to admit, not entirely stupid. The grazers settled to it, and Retta wrote it up seriously as an environmental enrichment protocol, and gave it a name, and the name was, to Vess's lasting delight, Ambient Kitchen. She approved it. It went in the supplement. There is now, in the official handling doctrine of the Concord's fauna wing at Velum Reach, a formally codified protocol called Ambient Kitchen, whose stated therapeutic basis is that specimens settle in the presence of the sounds a human makes when she is cooking and not afraid. Del, when she heard, put her face in her hands. "You people," she said, "will make doctrine out of anything." "We made doctrine out of you," Vess pointed out. "Yeah, well," Del went back to her onions. "At least I had the decency to be embarrassed about it." Retta went further still in time. She started leaving a pot of water simmering on a warming plate outside the difficult cells, on the theory, sincerely argued, in a footnote Vess could not bring herself to strike, that a specimen who could smell that somewhere nearby a person was calmly, patiently cooking would understand, at the level below thought where all animals lived, that the world was not presently ending. It should have been absurd. It worked often enough that Vess stopped calling it absurd and started calling it Protocol 9C, and the requisition line for the wing now carried, between the sedative reserves and the containment spares, a standing order for dried aromatics, which no auditor had yet questioned, and which Dell refused on principle to help select. Overseer Kale requested her full file from Harrow's Field, and read it, and requested more, and by the third month had drafted a memorandum to the Assembly that Vess was not cleared to read but whose gist she gathered from the overseer's changed manner. A memorandum, she understood, arguing that the conquered had systematically mise-weighted the threat and the value of human colonists from the high-rated worlds, and that the error was not academic, and that the fauna wing at Vellum Reach had accidentally produced the proof. Kale did not thank Dell again. But he ate in the galley now, once a rotation precisely, always alone, always the same bowl, and he entered it in no record, and Dell set his place without being asked, and something that was not friendship but was adjacent to respect grew up between the Viharn compliance officer and the human cook over identical bowls of soup, consumed in near silence, and Vess thought it might be the strangest and most hopeful thing the whole affair had produced. Not everyone took it easy, and Vess made herself remember that, because a method that only its author believed in was a sermon, not a doctrine. The hardest room was the handler debrief in the second week. Vess ran it herself in the wing's briefing bay with the recordings queued and the whole handler corps assembled, the people who had spent 11 cycles being told the Morven was a monster and had the scars and the buried colleagues to prove it. She played them the hour, the lying down, the feeding, the steadying through the second fault, the child walking past the jaw. And when it was done, a handler named Seuk stood up, the veteran who had nearly been the fourth death, who had a prosthetic along one whole side from the day the specimen had taught him what its reach was, and he was not gentle. "With respect, doctor," his voice was flat and hard, "I've seen the tape, we've all seen the tape. And I want to say the thing nobody's saying, which is that it worked once with one specimen on one afternoon, with one human who grew up on a slaughterhouse world, and now we're rewriting 11 cycles of doctrine that kept most of us alive on the strength of one lucky hour." He tapped the prosthetic. It rang. "This is from that animal. Reaching for it the wrong way, you'd say. Fine. But I reached for it the way the manual said, with the prod up and the team behind me, because that's the way that lets me go home with all my limbs, most days. You're telling us the prod was the problem. You're telling us the fear it read off me is what got me hurt. I'd like you to say that to my face, because it sounds a great deal like you're telling me it was my fault." The room went still. It was, Vess knew, the real question, the one under all of it, and if she flinched from it the method died in that bay. "I'm not telling you it was your fault, Seuk," she said. "I'm telling you it was ours, mine, the wings. We handed you a prod and a protocol built on domination, and we sent you at an animal that reads domination as threat, and when it answered the threat we called the animal a monster instead of calling the protocol wrong. You did exactly what you were trained to do. The training was the mistake, and you paid for our mistake with your arm, and I am sorry for it, and the least I can do is not make the next handler pay the same way." She let that sit. "And you're right that it worked once. That's why we study it instead of worshiping it. I'm not asking you to walk into a cell unarmed and unafraid tomorrow. I'd bury you, and I'm done burying handlers. I'm asking you to consider that the fear you carry, that we taught you to carry, that we armed instead of addressed, has been part of the loop all along. Not the whole of it, part of it. And that there might be a way to handle these animals that costs fewer arms. That's all, part of it. Consider it." Seuk stood a moment longer. Then he sat down slowly, and he did not say he was convinced, because he wasn't, and Vess respected him too much to want him to pretend. But he came down to the galley 3 days later, off shift, and sat in the corner, and watched Del be unbothered while she broke down a crate and said nothing, and came again the week after. He was, in the end, one of the ones it took with not all at once, and never completely, but enough that when they shipped the Morving to the preserve months later, it was Suok's steady prosthetic hand that guided the litter, and Suok who checked twice that the transport was warm. The proof that mattered came in the 5th week, and it did not come from Del, which was the whole point of it. One of the Wing's pack runners, a lean 6-legged pursuit hunter, nothing near the Morving's class but quick and high-strung and responsible for 2 handler injuries of its own, went into a panic spiral in its enclosure after a maintenance drone startled it, and by the time Vess reached the Wing it had worked itself into the corner pressing, wall-charging frenzy that the old protocol answered with a team and a net and a great deal of shouting. The old protocol was standing ready to do exactly that. Suok had the net, and Retta, young, converted, and either brave or foolish, Vess was never sure which the girl was asked to try the other way first. Vess led her. She stood in the observation gallery with her hearts in her throat, and let a junior handler walk toward a spiraling predator with empty hands. Retta did not do it perfectly. Her voice shook on the first words, and the pack runner flared harder, reading the shake, and for a moment Vess nearly called the net. But the girl caught herself. Vess watched her catch herself, watched her make the decision Del had described, watched her take the fear and put it somewhere the animal couldn't see and make her hands slow and her voice boring, and she stopped advancing, and she simply stood unhurried in the middle of the enclosure, being the one calm thing in a room full of alarm, and she waited. She did not loom. She did not reach. She stood there and let her own steadiness be the loudest thing in the room, and she waited the animal out. It took 11 minutes. Vess timed it, the way she timed everything. 11 minutes of a young handler standing still while a panicking predator charged and flared and slowly, by degrees, ran out of things to be afraid of, because the largest creature in the room refused to give it a reason. And at the end of the 11 minutes the pack runner stopped in the far corner, sides heaving, and looked at the small, still handler, and did the thing the Morving had done, the thing the whole method was built on. It stopped waiting to be hurt. Its flare went down. Retta breathed out and lowered herself slowly to a crouch, and stayed, and the animal came at last and lay down across the enclosure from her, not near, not tame, but calm. And the crisis was simply over, without a net, without a shout, without a single body added to the Wing's long ledger. Vess went and found Del in the galley that night and told her, and Del listened and nodded and went on chopping. "There," Del said, "see, it's not me. That's the thing I kept telling your overseer and your warden and you, and none of you heard it because you wanted a miracle worker, and a miracle worker's no use to you. She leaves, and the miracle leaves with her." She swept the chopped onion into the pot. "It was never me. It's just a thing a person can learn to do if somebody shows them it's possible and then gets out of their way. Your girl learned it. She'll teach the next one. That's how a road gets learned, Doctor. Not one person who can walk it, but one person who proves it can be walked, and then everybody moves their houses." She tasted, adjusted. "I gave you the proof it could be done. Your girl gave you the proof it could be taught. Hers matters more than mine. Put her name in your manual, too." Vess did. The other thing that changed, quietly, was Pim. The Sethi child had no family, station, orphan, the file said, raised by the collective creche and put to work as soon as it was old enough to carry a tray. And after the day of the animal it did not so much attach to Del as orbit her, the way a small thing orbits the one large thing that has proven it will stand between the small thing and the dark. Del did not make a fuss about it. She simply began to find work for 4 small hands, and to set an extra place, and to let the child sleep on the galley's warm bench on the nights the creche dormitory got too loud with the older ones. She taught it to hold a knife. She taught it, without ever once naming the lesson, to keep its hands slow and its voice boring. and Vess watched the most frightened creature on the station grow, over months, a little steadier at the edges, because it had found a calm thing to borrow from, exactly as the Morven had, exactly as the warden had, exactly as Vess was self-aware enough to admit she herself had. "You're raising it," Vess observed once, watching the child trail Dell around the galley with a mixing bowl. "I'm feeding it and giving it something to do with its hands," Dell said. "That's most of raising anything. The rest is just not being scared where they can see you." She corrected the child's grip on the whisk without looking. "It came standard broken, that one. Your creches turn out frightened, the way your wing turned out that animal, everything looming, nothing warm. So," she shrugged, "somebody's got to be the steady thing in the room, might as well be the one with the stove." And the Morving got better. Not tame. Vess was firm on that in every briefing because the last thing she wanted was a handler forgetting what it was and dying of the forgetting. It remained a Class 12 apex predator with 3 deaths behind it and the capacity for a 4th. But it got better. The plate flare, which had once stood at the mere approach of a handler, went flat and stayed flat. It accepted the new gentle field, the warm cell, the bedding, the food delivered by handlers who no longer loomed. It stopped testing the cell's weak corner. It slept often and deeply, the sleep of an animal that had finally stopped waiting to be hurt. And once, only once in the 4th month, when the wing was quiet and Vess judged the animal recovered enough to bear it, Del Varovic went down to the fauna wing to see it. She did not go into the cell. Vess had half expected her to, had half wanted her to, some sentimental part of her hoping for the reunion, the human and the animal she'd saved, the great head lowering into her hands. Del did none of it. She stopped at the observation gallery, on the safe side of the barrier field, and she stood there with her hands in the pockets of her coveralls, and she just looked, the way a person looks at a thing they set right and then let go of. "I'm not going in there," she told Vess before Vess could ask, "and I'm not going to make a habit of coming down. I want to be clear about that because I know your handlers are hoping I'll be the thing that talks it down whenever it acts up, and I'm not going to be, and it's not because I don't care." She watched the sleeping animal through the field. "It's because the worst thing I could do to it now is let it need me. It's got a life to have, a warm cell, and a preserve someday if the overseer's memo goes the way you think, and handlers who have learned not to loom. If I come down here every week, it hangs its whole comm on me, and then one day I'm gone, contract ends, I move on, I'm a cook, doctor, I go where the galleys are and it's got nothing, and it's worse off than if I'd never walked into its life at all." She shook her head. "I steadied it. That's a thing you do once so the animal can find its own feet. It's not a thing you do forever, or you've just built a different kind of cage. The best thing I can give it now is to not be necessary." And Vess, who had a doctorate and 31 years and had just been taught, one final time, something she should have known, said nothing, because there was nothing to add. But the Morven woke. It woke the way it always woke now, slow and unafraid, taking its careful inventory. And somewhere in the inventory, a scent reached it through the gallery's imperfect seals. A scent it had learned across the longest hour of its life, and had not smelled in 4 months. And the great head came up off the bedding fast, and the animal was on its feet before Vess could speak. And it crossed the cell to the barrier field in 3 of those silent water-smooth strides and stopped, its jaw a hand's width from the field. Its eyes fixed on the small human on the other side. It did not flare, it did not hiss. It stood at the barrier and looked at her, and its plate flare was flat, 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 and a sound came out of it that Vess had never heard from it or from any Morving, a low rolling rumble that came up through the deck like a cart on a bridge, the same sound it had made when Dell's hand first rested on its shoulder, the sound Vess had spent 4 months trying and failing to classify, and had finally, privately, given up and labeled in her own notes with a word that would never survive review. "Content." "Hey, big man," Dell said softly through the field. She didn't reach for it, she kept her hands in her pockets. "Look at you, warm, aren't you? Somebody kept a promise." The rumble deepened. "Yeah, I know." "I know." She stood there a while, and the animal stood there, the two of them a body length and a barrier field apart, and neither of them needed to close the distance, because the distance was the whole point, and they both, in their different ways, understood it. "You're going to be all right," Dell said. "You don't need me. That's the good news, even though it doesn't sound like good news. You're going to be all right without me. That's the best thing I know how to give anybody, or anything." She took her hands out of her pockets and pressed 2 fingers to the field for a moment, not to touch. You couldn't touch through the field, it was just a gesture, and then she stepped back. "Be good, be calm. Let them learn from you what I couldn't teach them straight." She turned to go. "I've got bread proofing." The Morven watched her walk the length of the gallery. It did not flare or pace or throw itself at the barrier the way a dependent animal would. It watched her go with the flat calm of a creature that had learned, from the one being it fully trusted, how to be all right, and it made the content tremble once more as she reached the door, low and long, and then it turned back to its warm cell and its bedding and its own recovered life, and it lay down. Vess walked Dell back up to the galley in silence, and it was Dell who broke it at the lift. "The memo," she said. "The overseers, you think it goes through, the preserve?" "I think it goes through," Vess said. "Kale doesn't draft memos he expects to lose. There's a world Saren's reach, a fauna preserve, controlled, monitored, but open ground and a real range. If the Assembly approves the reclassification, the Morven's a candidate. Not released, we couldn't, it's spent too long in custody, but a preserve, warm ground, room to be what it is." She glanced at the human. "You'd be all right with that, turning it loose near enough." "It's the whole reason I did any of it." Dell stepped into the lift. "You don't steady a thing so it can live in a nicer box, Doctor. You steady it so it can go be itself somewhere itself doesn't get it killed. Same thing my grandmother did with all of us on Harrow's Field. She didn't teach us calm so we'd survive the world. She taught us calm so we could go anywhere in it." The lift doors began to close. "Send it to the preserve. Send me the picture when it's standing on open ground. Then we're square, it and me. Then I did the whole job." The memo went through. It took the Assembly 2 more months, and a review Vess testified at, standing in front of a panel of officials who had never met a human, and asking them to reclassify an entire category of citizen on the strength of 9 cameras and a kitchen worker's afternoon. She was not a natural speaker. She told them the truth plainly, which was the only register she had, and she told them about the warm cell, and the bedding and the 31 years it had taken her to think of making the box warm. And she told them that the wing had spent 11 cycles trying to dominate an animal that a provisioning specialist had steadied in an hour, and that the difference had not been strength or weapons or training but a single quality the conquered had never thought to measure, and had been carrying past its own checkpoints. In the persons of small, unarmored humans it had rated as harmless. The panel reclassified the Morven as a preserve candidate. It also, at Kale's quiet urging, opened a study into the handling implications of human colonial psychology, which was the bloodless bureaucratic way of saying that the conquered had begun, at last, to ask the question Dell had put to the overseer through a galley intercom on the worst day of the station's history. Not whether it understood what the animal was, but whether it understood what the human was. They shipped the Morven to Saren's Reach in the 9th month, in a warm transport, sedated gently by the steadying method's own protocol, handled by Suuk and Retta and a team that no longer loomed. Osk sent bedding along, because Osk always would now. And 3 weeks after that, an image came through to the galley, forwarded by Vess, taken by a preserve monitor from a respectful distance. A great slate animal standing on open ground under an amber sky, on the warm soil of a world that was not its own but was close enough. Its head up, its plate flare flat, the whole silent water-smooth mass of it at rest in a place with no walls. Dell looked at the picture for a long time. Then she set the slate down on the counter, propped against the leaking teapot where she could see it, and she went back to her stove, and she did not say anything, and Vess, who had come down to watch her see it, understood that this was what square looked like, and that the human considered the job now done, and that there would be no ceremony about it because there was never any ceremony about it. There was only the work, and the next pot, and the pilot light burning low and steady under an empty stove. Vess asked her about it once more, near the end of the contract, when the resupply was in, and Dell was packing her knives to move on to whatever galley came next, because cooks go where the galleys are. "I've never asked you straight," Vess said, "that first hour. When it walked into your galley and you turned around and it lay down, were you afraid, at all, in the beginning before you knew?" Dell wrapped a knife in its cloth and slid it into the roll. "Course I was," she said. "I told you, you don't get to be unscared. Anybody tells you they felt nothing with a ton of teeth in the doorway is lying, and you shouldn't trust them near an animal because a person who doesn't feel the fear can't manage it." She rolled the knives tight and tied the strap. "I was afraid the whole time, Doctor. From the second it walked into the second it went under. Every minute of it. Afraid the way you'd be, or the warden, or anybody with sense." She set the knife roll in her kit. "The difference is just where I put it. You people, when you're afraid, you put it in your hands, you reach for the weapon, you loom. You make the room bigger and louder and harder, and the animal reads all of it. Where I'm from, you put the fear somewhere the animal can't see it, and then you make your hands slow and your voice boring and you go on with your work, because the work is the thing that tells the scared animal and the scared people, and honestly your warden and honestly you, that the world is still turning and nobody's died yet and there's a sauce that needs finishing." She shouldered the kit. "That's the whole trick. That's all it ever was. I'm not braver than your handlers. I'm not calmer underneath. I've just got somewhere else to put it because I grew up somewhere that would have killed me if I didn't." She paused at the galley door and looked back at the small warm room, the clean pass, the tabby on its box, the pilot light. "The animal was never the dangerous thing in that room, Doctor. Neither was I. The dangerous thing in that room was fear. Everybody's, the animal's, yours, mine. And you don't beat fear with a bigger weapon. You beat it by not letting it drive. You beat it by looking up when the apex predator walks in, and deciding you're not going to move because you've got a sauce on, and it can wait its turn like everybody else." She picked up the tabby, tucked it into the crook of her arm, and turned off the light. "It waited its turn," she said from the doorway. "They usually do once they see you're busy. Take care of the wing, Doctor. Keep the cells warm." And Del Varovic, provisioning specialist, grade 2, who had refused to leave her station for a Class 12 apex predator, and made an entire interstellar power stop, and reconsider what it had been carrying past its own checkpoints all along, walked out of the galley with her knives and her cat, and left the door standing open behind her, the way you leave a door open when nothing in the room needs protecting anymore. Vess stood in the empty galley a while in the warm and did not turn the light back on, because the pilot flame was enough, low and steady and unbothered, the way the best things were. Then she went down to the wing to check the cells were warm. They were.